Listen to the rain settling on the old cobblestones, each drop a quiet memory of a world simply trying to find its breath. There is a profound stillness in the twilight of these narrow streets, a quiet space between the end of a long, weary day and the gentle arrival of sleep. The sky above the sloping rooftops deepens into a soft, bruised purple, and one by one, the pale yellow lights of the city begin to bloom behind glass panes. This is a time before the world grew loud. It is a time of whispered hopes, of tired hands resting on worn kitchen tables, and of ordinary people leaning into the quiet comfort of one another against the chill of an uncertain world. If you were to walk down these streets, your footsteps softly echoing against the stone, you would not see the pages of history turning. You would only see the delicate, intricate tapestry of everyday life. You would see the faint glow of a gas lamp reflecting in the puddles left by the afternoon shower, creating small, wavering pools of gold in the dark. You would smell the faint, earthy scent of damp wool, of distant wood smoke, and the comforting aroma of boiling potatoes and cabbage soup drifting down from an open window. The people who live behind these glowing windows are carrying a heavy quietness. They have lived through difficult years, weathering storms of hardship that have left their coats threadbare and their cupboards nearly bare. Yet, within these modest walls, there is a beautiful, quiet resilience. It is not the loud, sweeping heroism written about in books, but the soft, enduring courage of simply carrying on, of making do, of finding warmth in a world that often feels entirely too cold. Imagine stepping into one of these homes, ascending a narrow, wooden staircase that creaks a familiar, comforting rhythm with every step. The hallway smells of floor wax and old dust, a scent that speaks of generations of careful, quiet living. Behind a heavy wooden door, the evening is unfolding. In a small, dimly lit room, a family gathers around a cast-iron stove. The fire inside is modest, fed by small pieces of carefully rationed coal and scraps of gathered wood, but it radiates a deep, golden heat. The father sits in a worn armchair, his posture slightly stooped from the weight of long hours of labor. His hands, calloused and rough, hold a child's leather shoe. The sole has come loose, worn down by miles of walking on uneven paving stones. With a quiet, steady patience, he applies a thick paste of glue, binding the leather back together. He does not complain about the weariness in his bones. He simply focuses on the shoe, his silent labor a profound act of love, ensuring that his child will have warm, dry feet for the walk to school tomorrow. Across from him, his wife sits bathed in the amber light of a solitary reading lamp. In her lap rests a basket of mending. She weaves a needle and thread through the heel of a woolen sock, the rhythmic motion of her hands an ancient, soothing dance. The click of the needle, the soft pull of the cotton thread, the gentle rustle of fabric, these are the peaceful sounds of a home quietly preserving itself. She occasionally lifts her head, offering a soft, exhausted smile to her husband. In that brief, shared glance, there is an entire language spoken. It is a language of mutual understanding, of shared burdens, and of a deep, unspoken vow to protect the fragile peace of their small sanctuary. In the corner of the room, tucked beneath a heavy, quilted blanket, two children are already asleep. Their breathing is slow and even, a gentle rise and fall that sets the rhythm for the entire room. Their faces are relaxed, untroubled by the anxieties that line the foreheads of the adults. In their dreams, the world is not a place of struggle or scarcity, but a vast, open field of play. The parents listen to the sound of their breathing, drawing an immense, quiet strength from it. It is for this peace, for this innocent slumber, that they weather the long, gray days. As the night deepens, the city outside settles into a deep, meditative hush. The occasional rumble of a distant tram or the solitary chime of a church clock only serves to deepen the surrounding silence. The wind sighs softly against the window panes, a gentle draft that makes the candle flame waver, casting long, dancing shadows against the floral wallpaper. In another apartment, just down the street, an older woman sits alone by her window. The room is cool, but she is wrapped tightly in a thick, knitted shawl. On the table before her rests a single piece of paper, covered in the neat, careful handwriting of her daughter, who has moved to a distant town to find work. The woman picks up the letter, her fragile fingers tracing the dried ink. She knows the words by heart, having read them countless times since the postman delivered the envelope that morning, but she reads them again, letting the voice of her child fill the quiet room. The letter does not speak of grand events. It speaks of the changing color of the leaves, of a friendly landlady, of a new recipe for baking bread with less flour. It ends with a simple promise to visit when the winter thaws. The older woman smiles, a solitary tear catching the moonlight as it traces the familiar lines of her face. She carefully folds the paper, smoothing the creases with a tender reverence, and places it inside a wooden box lined with velvet. It is a small, private treasure, a fragile paper bridge connecting her isolated room to the wider, breathing world. She closes her eyes, leaning her head against the cool glass of the window, sending a silent, whispered blessing out into the dark night. When morning finally arrives, it does not break with a sudden shout, but with a slow, gentle lifting of the dark. The sky turns the color of pale ash, and the first tentative rays of sunlight catch the frost that has gathered on the edges of the cobblestones. The city begins to stir, a slow, deliberate stretching of stiff limbs. In a small bakery on the corner, the day has been alive for hours. The air inside is thick and warm, heavy with the intoxicating, deeply comforting aroma of yeast, roasted grain, and warm sugar. The baker, his apron dusted white with flour, moves with a practiced, rhythmic grace. He shapes the dough with large, gentle hands, coaxing the humble ingredients into loaves that will sustain his neighbors through another day. The bell above the shop door chimes a cheerful, bright note, breaking the early morning quiet. A young mother enters, holding a woven basket over her arm. She approaches the wooden counter, her eyes scanning the modest display of bread. She carefully opens her coin purse, counting out the small, copper pieces with a quiet anxiety. The baker watches her, reading the unspoken worry in the tired set of her shoulders. She asks for a small, dark loaf, pushing the exact, meager amount of coins across the worn wood. The baker nods. He reaches for the loaf she requested, but as he slides it into the brown paper bag, his hand sweeps over a second, smaller roll, one with a golden, crusty top, baked fresh only moments ago. With a swift, practiced motion, he slips the extra roll into the bag, folding the top down securely before handing it across the counter. "A little extra today," he murmurs, his voice a low, warm rumble. "For the little ones at home." The morning air is sharp. The mother pauses, her hands wrapping around the warm paper. She looks up, her eyes meeting his. She doesn't speak, but her eyes shine with a sudden, overwhelming gratitude. It is a profoundly small gesture, a single roll of bread, but in a world where every crumb is counted, it is a magnificent act of grace. It is a quiet reminder that they are not alone, that even in the struggle to survive, the human heart still bends toward kindness. She whispers a soft thank you, a sound barely louder than the rustle of the paper, and steps back out into the cool morning air, her step just a little bit lighter, the warmth of the bread seeping through the bag and into her chilled hands. These are the quiet moments that string the days together. As the sun climbs higher, casting long, pale beams of light down the narrow alleys, the streets fill with the soft hum of daily life. Bicycles rattle gently over the stones. The sweeping of a broom against the pavement creates a steady, rhythmic shhh sound. Neighbors pause on corners, pulling their collars up against the breeze, sharing quiet conversations. They do not talk of the shadows gathering on the horizon, or the loud, angry voices that sometimes drift through the radio statics. They talk of the approaching frost, of a lingering cough, of the hope that the grocer will have fresh cabbage by Friday. They are simply trying to hold onto the gentle rhythm of the ordinary. They are weaving a fragile net of community, holding each other up through shared smiles, lent cups of sugar, and the quiet dignity of facing the day together. In a courtyard hidden behind the tall brick buildings, a group of children has gathered. They are playing a game of marbles in the dirt, their voices a soft, melodic chatter rising into the crisp air. One boy, his trousers patched at the knees, carefully lines up his shot, his face a picture of intense, innocent concentration. He flicks his thumb, and the glass marble rolls across the uneven ground, striking its target with a satisfying, crystalline clink. The children cheer, a bright, pure sound that echoes against the soot-stained walls. From a window high above, a mother pauses in her sweeping to look down at the courtyard. She watches the children, their bright, untroubled faces turned toward the pale sun. She rests her chin on her hands, leaning against the wooden frame. For a moment, the weight of the world lifts from her shoulders. She lets the sound of their laughter wash over her, a soothing balm to her tired spirit. In their joy, she finds her own quiet hope. She hopes that the world will be gentle with them. She hopes that the cobblestones they play on will always lead them back to a warm hearth and a safe embrace. As the afternoon slowly gives way to evening once again, the cycle of quiet resilience begins anew. The shadows lengthen, stretching like long, protective arms across the streets. The baker sweeps the flour from his floor. The father puts away his tools. The older woman lights a single candle against the gathering dusk. The air grows still, the rain from the day before completely dried away, leaving the cobblestones cool and smooth. There is a deep, abiding peace in this twilight hour. It is the peace of a door softly closing against the night, of heavy curtains drawn across a window, shutting out the vast, unpredictable world. Inside these homes, the fires are stoked once more. The simple meals are shared, the silent prayers of gratitude are whispered into the warm air. The people of this city, these ordinary souls carrying extraordinary burdens of love and survival, settle into the quiet embrace of the night. They do not know what the turning pages of the calendar will bring. They do not know of the storms that are waiting to break. Tonight, they only know the warmth of the blanket, the steady heartbeat of their loved one sleeping beside them, and the gentle, rhythmic ticking of the clock on the mantel. They close their eyes, wrapped in the soft, protective dark, trusting in the quiet strength they have found in each other. They surrender to the deep, restorative well of sleep, simply hoping, with all the quiet power of the human heart, for a gentler tomorrow. And as the city sleeps, the cobblestones remain, silent witnesses to the enduring, beautiful fragility of ordinary life, holding the echoes of their footsteps until the dawn returns. Listen to the soft, heavy click of a brass lock turning in the evening, a sound that once simply meant it was time to rest, but now carries the faint, unspoken weight of holding the outside world away. There is a subtle change drifting through the narrow streets and wide avenues, as silent and invisible as a change in the weather. It does not arrive with a sudden crash, but rather like the slow, quiet creeping of dusk turning into night. The sky still turns its familiar shades of violet and bruised orange, the chimney smoke still twists into the cool air, and the baker still shapes his dough before the sun rises. But if you look closely, if you sit quietly on a wooden bench beneath the bare branches of the linden trees, you can feel a new texture in the air. It is the feeling of a profound, collective hesitation. The people who walk these streets, ordinary men and women carrying groceries and mending worn coats, are slowly beginning to change the choreography of their daily lives. It is a dance of quiet caution. Where once neighbors would lean out of their open windows, calling cheerful greetings across the courtyards, exchanging recipes and local gossip over the fluttering laundry lines, those windows are now being gently, firmly pulled shut. The heavy fabrics of living room curtains are drawn a little earlier in the evening. The bright, warm squares of light that used to spill out onto the cobblestones are disappearing, replaced by the blank, shadowed faces of closed buildings. Imagine a long, winding staircase inside an old apartment building. The wooden steps are worn smooth in the center from decades of footfalls. This stairwell used to be a vibrant artery of life. It was a place where the scent of roasting onions from the second floor mingled with the smell of floor wax from the third, where children chased each other up and down, and where adults lingered on the landings to discuss the day. But now, as a young mother carries her basket of laundry up the steps, the space feels remarkably still. She rounds the corner to her floor and hears the murmur of two voices from the landing above. It is her neighbor, an elderly clockmaker, speaking with the postman. As her leather shoes softly strike the wood, the voices abruptly cease. It is not a malicious silence, but a sudden, protective reflex. She looks up and offers a polite, tight smile. The men nod in return, tipping their hats, their faces polite but carefully blank. The air between them is heavy with the things they have suddenly decided not to say. She turns the key in her door, stepping into her small hallway, and presses her back against the wood as it clicks shut, letting out a long, slow breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The world is becoming a place of small, private islands. This quiet retreating extends beyond the apartment doors and out into the public squares. In a corner cafe, bathed in the soft, hazy light of a cloudy afternoon, two old friends sit at a small marble-top table. They have shared coffee at this very table every Tuesday for years. The porcelain cups clink against the saucers, a familiar, comforting sound. The air smells of roasted coffee beans and sweet pastry. They talk about the dampness in the walls, the changing color of the autumn leaves, and the rising cost of shoe leather. But beneath the gentle hum of their conversation, there is a vast, unnavigable river of silence. One friend glances down at a newspaper resting on his lap. He reads a headline, his brow furrowing slightly, but he does not read it aloud. Instead, with a slow, deliberate movement, he folds the paper in half, and then in half again, and slides it quietly into his leather satchel, out of sight. He looks up at his friend, his eyes searching the familiar face across from him. There is a terrifying, heartbreaking realization blooming in his chest. He no longer knows for certain what his oldest friend is thinking. The trust that once flowed so easily between them has encountered an invisible dam. The world outside the cafe windows has grown loud with new anthems and marching boots, and in response, their private world has grown desperately quiet. Yet, in this sea of unspoken anxiety, there is still a quiet heroism to be found. The friend across the table sees the slight tremble in the man's hand as he lifts his coffee cup. Without a word, he reaches across the cold marble and rests his hand briefly, warmly, over his friend's. It is a fleeting touch, lasting only a second, but it speaks volumes. It says, "I am still here. You are not alone." In a world that is demanding conformity, this tiny, silent gesture of enduring loyalty is a profound act of defiance. As the afternoon light fades and evening settles over the city, the retreat inward becomes even more pronounced. Inside a small, tidy living room, a father sits at his writing desk. A small brass lamp casts a pool of warm, amber light over the dark wood. He is dipping a fountain pen into a glass bottle of blue ink, preparing to write a letter to his sister who lives in a distant village in the mountains. He wants to tell her about the strange heaviness in his chest. He wants to write about how the children at the school where he teaches are wearing new uniforms, how their innocent games have taken on a sharp, regimented edge. He wants to tell her how he looks over his shoulder before speaking to the butcher. But as the nib of his pen hovers over the crisp, white paper, he stops. He knows that letters pass through many hands. He knows that his worry might become her burden, or worse, a danger to them both. And so, with a quiet, heartbreaking sacrifice of his own need for comfort, he protects her. He writes about the plum tree in the small courtyard, noting that it has finally lost all its leaves. He writes that the children are growing tall, and that his wife has managed to preserve 3 jars of sweet strawberries. He signs it with deep affection. The most important words of the letter are the ones that remain unwritten, hidden safely in the blank margins of the paper. He folds the letter carefully, sliding it into the envelope, sealing away his fears. This is the new way of loving someone, by shielding them from your own truth, by wrapping them in the gentle, protective blanket of mundane things. Across the room, his wife is sitting near the large, wooden radio cabinet. For years, this radio was the glowing heart of their evenings, bringing the sweeping melodies of symphonies and the light-hearted chatter of comedy into their quiet home. But recently, the voices that emanate from the woven fabric speaker have grown harsh, loud, and demanding. They fill the small room with a strange, aggressive energy that makes the air feel tight. She looks at her husband, who gives a small, tired nod. With a soft click, she turns the heavy dial. The glowing orange light of the radio tube slowly fades to black, and the room is instantly plunged into a deep, ringing silence. It is a relief, but it is also an isolation. They are cutting the cord to the outside world, pulling the drawbridge up to protect their small castle. The parents sit together on the worn sofa, the only sound the rhythmic ticking of the mantel clock and the gentle settling of the coals in the stove. They speak to each other, but their voices are instinctively hushed, reduced to soft, breathy whispers. There is no one else in the apartment. The children are fast asleep in the next room, lost in the pure, untroubled dreams of youth. There is no logical reason to whisper. Yet, they lower their voices because the very atmosphere of their lives has begun to feel porous, as though the shadows in the corners of the room might be listening. They whisper to preserve the sanctity of their private space, wrapping their words in quietness so they cannot be carried away. Before they turn out the lamp to sleep, the husband reaches up to a high bookshelf. Behind a row of practical encyclopedias and cookbooks, he has hidden a small, worn volume of poetry. He pulls it out gently, running his thumb over the faded cloth cover. He opens it to a random page and reads a single stanza by a poet whose name is no longer supposed to be spoken. He reads it only with his eyes, letting the beautiful, forbidden words wash over his mind. It is a quiet, solitary rebellion. In a society that is slowly demanding that every thought align with the turning of a massive, dark wheel, holding onto this small book is his way of tending to the garden of his own soul. He is preserving a tiny ember of beauty in the dark. He carefully slides the book back into its hiding place, blowing out the lamp. The city outside is now fully asleep, but it is a guarded slumber. The streets are empty, the cobblestones cool and pale under the light of a crescent moon. Behind the thousands of closed doors and drawn curtains, ordinary people are lying awake in the dark, listening to the silence of their homes. They are learning to navigate a world where safety is found in blending in, and lowering the eyes, and walking softly. Yet, beneath the heavy blanket of this quiet conformity, their hearts still beat with the same hopes they have always held. They still love their children fiercely. They still long for warmth, for truth, and for the simple comfort of a friend's honest laugh. The doors may be closed, and the curtains may be tightly drawn, but the gentle, enduring light of their humanity continues to glow in the private dark, waiting patiently for a time when the world will be safe enough to open the windows once more. Look at the warm, trembling glow of a paper lantern, strung so perfectly across the town square, masking the deep shadows pooling just plainly beyond the reach of its light. It is a beautiful evening, the kind of evening where the air is perfectly still, carrying the sweet, roasted scent of candied almonds and the faint, earthy fragrance of the surrounding pine forests. The town is draped in vibrant colors. Banners flutter lazily in the gentle breeze, and the cobblestones have been swept clean for the celebrations. From a distance, if you were to stand on a high hill looking down into the valley, you would see a community bathed in golden light, humming with the gentle, rhythmic music of a brass band playing a familiar, cheerful waltz. It looks, in every conceivable way, like a picture of absolute peace and newfound prosperity. The bakeries have flour again, the factories have opened their doors, and the streets are filled with people walking arm in arm. But as we drift closer, stepping softly into the crowded square, the texture of this perfect picture begins to reveal its delicate, fragile seams. This is a time of an intricate, quiet illusion. It is a season where the bright sunlight of public life casts long, dark, and complicated shadows into the private corners of the human heart. The people gathered here under the swaying lanterns are participating in a profound, exhausting performance. They are wearing their finest clothes, their shoes are polished to a brilliant shine, and upon their faces, they wear the most perfectly constructed smiles. Imagine the immense, silent weight of a smile that you cannot afford to drop. It is a smile that does not start in the eyes or warm the spirit. It is a shield, forged from quiet necessity and worn as a protective armor. To be seen at the festival, to be seen nodding in rhythm to the music, to be seen lifting a glass of cider in cheerful agreement, this has become the unspoken currency of safety. And so, ordinary men and women, mothers and fathers, shopkeepers and teachers, become quiet actors on a grand, brightly lit stage. They clap when the crowd claps. They cheer when the cheers rise into the cool evening air. They perform their contentment with a graceful, heartbreaking precision. Let us step away from the center of the square, moving toward the softer edges where the light begins to fade. Here, beneath the sprawling canopy of an ancient oak tree, two men stand together holding warm mugs of spiced wine. They have been neighbors for decades. Their lives are woven together by shared fences, borrowed tools, and 1,000 quiet evenings spent smoking pipes on their back porches. In the old days, just a few short years ago, their conversations were deep, winding rivers. They would argue about philosophy, share their deepest, most vulnerable worries about the future, and laugh with a rich, uninhibited warmth that echoed into the night. Tonight, the air between them feels entirely different. It is perfectly polite, but it is made of glass. The music is wonderful this evening, one man says, his voice smooth and careful. He looks straight ahead at the bandstand. Yes, truly wonderful, the other replies, nodding slowly, taking a small sip from his mug. And the Harvest Festival is so well organized this year. We are very fortunate. Very fortunate, the first agrees quickly. The weather has been uncommonly kind. They stand in silence for a long moment, the cheerful waltz washing over them. It is a profound, aching loneliness to stand so close to your dearest friend and feel an ocean of unspoken words stretching between you. Each man knows the other is struggling. Each man feels the same quiet tightening in his chest. But the instinct to protect is stronger than the desire to connect. They do not speak their truths because they do not want to burden each other with dangerous thoughts, nor do they know, with absolute certainty, if the man standing beside them has slowly changed his mind. And so, the friendship remains frozen in pleasantries. They gently clink their mugs together, offering a warm, hollow smile, mourning the loss of their old, beautifully honest bond in the deepest silence of their hearts. This quiet retreat into the self touches every home, drifting like a fine mist under the doorways and through the cracks in the window panes. In a sunlit kitchen earlier that same day, a mother stood at her wooden table, humming a soft, absent melody. Spread out before her was a small, pristine uniform. It was meant for her young daughter, who was preparing to march in the afternoon parade. The fabric was crisp, the seams perfectly straight. With a heavy, cast-iron iron, the mother carefully pressed away every single wrinkle. The hissing of the steam against the damp cloth was a soothing, rhythmic sound. She loves her daughter with a fierce, all-encompassing devotion. When she looks at the child's bright, eager face, she sees the entire world. But as she folds the uniform, her hands tremble just a fraction of an inch. She feels a deep, cold sorrow pooling in her stomach. She does not want her child to wear these clothes. She does not want her daughter to march in perfect, unthinking lines, absorbing words and songs that feel sharp and cold. Yet, when her daughter skips into the kitchen, her hair braided perfectly, the mother turns and offers a smile of radiant, unwavering encouragement. She kneels down, tying the required scarf around the small neck, her fingers gentle and steady. "You look beautiful, my darling," she whispers, smoothing the girl's hair. "Go on, now. Have a wonderful time. Wave to me when you pass by." The daughter beams, entirely unaware of the invisible tears falling within her mother's heart. As the heavy front door clicks shut, the mother remains kneeling on the kitchen floor. The smile slowly vanishes from her face, leaving behind a portrait of profound exhaustion. She reaches out, resting her hand against the warm leg of the kitchen table, simply breathing in the quiet dust of the room, grounding herself. Her performance was flawless. Her child is safe. This is the everyday heroism of this era, the silent swallowing of fear to preserve the innocence of those you love, even if only for one more day. The effort of this constant, gentle deception weaves its way into every written word as well. In a small room above a bakery, bathed in the soft glow of a desk lamp, a young woman is writing a letter to her cousin across the country. She uses a beautiful fountain pen, the nib gliding smoothly across the pale blue paper. She writes of the lovely new parks, the abundance of fresh bread in the bakery downstairs, and the joyful atmosphere of the town festivals. She paints a picture of a life that is serene and perfectly content. She knows that letters are delicate things, that eyes other than her cousin's might glance at the flowing script. She writes for those invisible readers, crafting a masterpiece of cheerfulness. But as she writes the words, "We are all so very happy here," she pauses. A sudden, overwhelming wave of homesickness for the simple truth washes over her. A single, heavy tear escapes her eyelashes, falling quietly onto the paper, landing perfectly over the word happy. The ink bleeds slightly, blurring the carefully formed letters. She gasps softly, quickly reaching for a blotter. She presses it to the page, hoping it will look like a spilled drop of tea or a careless splash of water. She seals the envelope with a deep sigh, sending away her perfectly constructed fiction, wishing she could have simply written, "I am afraid, and I miss you." As the evening wears on in the town square, the energy begins to gently wane. The musicians in the brass band lower their instruments, wiping their brows, their faces showing the natural fatigue of a long performance. The children, sticky with spun sugar, have fallen asleep on their fathers' shoulders. The bright paper lanterns stringing the square begin to flicker, their candles burning down to small, glowing embers. Slowly, families begin to drift away from the light, walking back down the narrow, cobblestone streets toward their homes. The air cools, bringing a refreshing, cleansing chill to the night. Follow them as they approach their doorways. Watch the subtle, physical transformation that occurs the moment the key turns and the lock in the door closes, shutting out the street, shutting out the town, shutting out the watchful eyes of the world. In the dim safety of their hallways, you can hear the collective, quiet exhaling of an entire society. Shoulders that have been held rigidly straight all day suddenly drop. The forced, pleasant expressions melt away, revealing faces that are weary, lined with a quiet, persistent anxiety. Coats are unbuttoned and hung on wooden pegs with slow, tired movements. Shoes that have tapped cheerfully to marching bands are slipped off, leaving tired feet to find comfort in worn, familiar slippers. A husband and wife stand in their unlit kitchen, the moonlight spilling across the floorboards. They do not turn on the electric light. They find comfort in the shadows, where nothing needs to be performed or seen. The husband leans his forehead against the cool glass of the window, looking out into the darkened courtyard. His wife steps behind him, wrapping her arms gently around his waist, resting her cheek against his back. They do not say a word about the festival, the speeches, or the music. They simply stand in the profound, sacred honesty of the dark. This is their sanctuary. This quiet, unlit room is the only place left where they can simply breathe, where they do not have to smile, where they can acknowledge the gathering dusk without fear. As the night deepens, the town falls into a deep, heavy slumber. The banners hang motionless in the still air. The paper lanterns have all burned out, leaving only the soft, silver light of the stars to watch over the rooftops. Beneath those roofs, ordinary people pull their blankets tight under their chins, seeking refuge in the gentle oblivion of sleep. They rest their tired minds, gathering the quiet strength they will need to wake up tomorrow, to tie their shoes, to step out into the sunlight, and to put the smile back on, braving the illusion for another day. Notice the dust gathering softly on a brass doorknob that hasn't been turned in days, a quiet, heartbreaking monument to a sudden and unexplained absence. There is a particular kind of silence that falls over a street when a piece of its heart is quietly taken away. It is not the peaceful silence of a Sunday morning, nor the restful quiet of a midnight snow globe. It is a heavy, lingering stillness, a hollow space left behind where laughter, footsteps, and the familiar rhythm of a neighbor's life used to be. Imagine a street bathed in the soft, gray light of an early autumn morning. The air is crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the faint, metallic hint of a coming frost. The cobblestones are damp with dew. Up and down the avenue, the day is beginning just as it always does. Chimneys begin to gently puff white smoke into the pale sky. The distant rattle of a baker's cart echoes around the corner. A flock of sparrows scatters from a telephone wire. But as a woman stands in her kitchen, holding a warm mug of chicory coffee, she looks out her window and feels a sudden, profound chill that has nothing to do with the weather. Across the street, the house with the beautiful, dark green shutters sits perfectly still. Yesterday, her neighbor, a kind man with gentle eyes who always tipped his hat to her, was sweeping the front steps. She had heard him humming a familiar tune, a soft melody that drifted through the open windows. She had seen his wife tending to the late-blooming geraniums in the window boxes. Today, the broom leans haphazardly against the brick wall, untouched. The flowers droop, thirsty for the morning water they always received. On the front porch, 2 glass bottles of milk sit in the shadows, a thin layer of cream gathering at the top. The curtains of the house are drawn tightly shut, presenting a blank, unblinking face to the world. The woman holding the coffee mug feels her heart beat a little faster, a quiet drum of dread in her chest. She does not open her window to call out. She does not walk across the street to knock on the heavy oak door. She simply stands there, hidden behind the delicate lace of her own curtains, staring at the untouched milk. She knows, with a quiet, devastating certainty, that the house is empty. This is how the world began to fracture, not with a sudden earthquake, but with the quiet dissolving of the bonds that held a neighborhood together. People simply stopped being there. The fabric of everyday life, once tightly woven with the threads of diverse lives, began to fray, leaving gaping, silent holes. Think of the local grocer, a man who has spent 20 years learning the exact preferences of every family on his street. He stands behind his wooden counter, carefully arranging a pyramid of green apples. He wipes his hands on his apron and glances up at the clock, then toward the door. Every Tuesday at exactly 10 o'clock, a young woman would come in. She always brought her little boy, a child with wild, dark curls who would hide behind his mother's skirt and peek out at the jars of hard candies. She always bought a specific, fragrant black tea and half a pound of dried lentils. The hands of the clock slide past 10. The little bell above the door remains silent. The grocer looks down at his ledger. He traces a calloused finger over her name, written in his own looping handwriting. He knows she will not come today. He knows she will likely never come again. He slowly closes the heavy leather cover of the ledger, the soft thud sounding like a falling stone in the quiet shop. A customer approaches the counter to pay for a loaf of bread. The 2 men do not speak of the absence. They exchange coins, their eyes briefly meeting in a shared, sorrowful understanding, before looking away. The silence in the shop is thicker than the smell of the roasted coffee beans. To live in this time is to carry the heavy, invisible weight of this silence. It is to walk down your own street and feel like a ghost haunting your own life. For many, the most unbearable weight is the memory of the night before. Deep in the night, when the rest of the city was wrapped in the comforting blanket of sleep, a different, harsher reality unfolded. Imagine a family lying awake in their beds, the covers pulled tightly up to their chins. The room is dark, save for a sliver of moonlight filtering through the blinds. Suddenly, the silence of the street is broken by the sound of a heavy engine idling at the curb. Then, the terrifying, rhythmic crunch of leather boots on the gravel. Voices, sharp and commanding, slice through the cool night air. A heavy knock at the door next door. The family in their bed does not move. The father reaches out, his hand finding his wife's in the dark, their fingers intertwining with a desperate, crushing grip. They hold their breath. They listen to the muffled sounds filtering through the plaster walls, the scraping of a chair, the confused, frightened cry of a child, the hurried packing of a single suitcase. They lie there, paralyzed by a deeply human, deeply terrible fear. They want to rush out. They want to throw open their door and offer sanctuary. They want to stand between their friends and the dark unknown. But the instinct to protect their own children, sleeping peacefully in the next room, roots them to the mattress. They swallow their courage, choosing the safety of the shadows. Then comes the sound of the front door closing. The boots retreat down the gravel path. The car door slams, a sound that echoes like a gunshot in the quiet avenue. The engine revs, and the car slowly pulls away, its tires hissing against the damp pavement until the sound fades completely into the distance. The father and wife are left in the suffocating quiet. The danger has passed their door, but the relief is instantly swallowed by an ocean of guilt. It is a guilt that tastes like ash in the mouth. It is the realization that they survived by being invisible, by turning away, by letting the dark waters close over the heads of their friends. The father turns his face into his pillow, a single, silent tear slipping down his cheek. He knows that tomorrow, he will have to look at the empty house, and he will have to live with the ghost of his own inaction. Yet, even in the midst of this overwhelming shadow, there are tiny, fragile sparks of grace. There are quiet rebellions of the heart that go unseen by the world, but mean everything to those who hold them. In an apartment building just across town, a young woman softly opens her front door and steps into the dimly lit hallway. She wears a soft woolen robe, her bare feet making no sound on the floorboards. She looks left, then right, ensuring the hallway is completely empty. She slips across the corridor to the door opposite hers. Yesterday, her neighbor, a retired schoolteacher who used to play the cello beautifully on Sunday afternoons, was taken away. But before she left, in a hurried, tearful moment on the landing, the older woman had pressed a small, brass key into the younger woman's hand. Now, the young woman slides the key into the lock. It turns with a soft, metallic click. She pushes the door open and steps inside. The apartment smells faintly of lavender and old paper. Everything is exactly as the teacher left it. A teacup sits on the saucer, half full of cold tea. A book is splayed open on the reading chair. The beautiful wooden cello rests silently in its stand in the corner. The young woman hasn't come to take anything for herself. She walks over to the windowsill, where a row of small, potted ferns sits bathing in the morning light. She picks up a small brass watering can and gently, lovingly, waters each plant. She carefully snips away a withered brown leaf. She touches the soft, green fronds, whispering a quiet promise into the empty room. She will keep the plants alive. She will dust the bookshelves. She will keep the brass key safe in the deepest pocket of her coat. It is a profoundly dangerous act of love, this tending to an empty space. It is her way of saying to the universe that this life mattered, that this woman is not forgotten, and that she is saving a place for her return, no matter how impossible that return might seem. She steps back out into the hallway, locking the door securely behind her, carrying the secret warmth of that small act back into her own life. These are the unseen stories woven into the fabric of the empty streets. The absences are not just missing people, they are missing melodies in the symphony of the city. Think of a small elementary school classroom on a Tuesday morning. The wooden desks are arranged in neat rows, the inkwells freshly filled. The teacher, a kind man with chalk dust on his sleeves, stands at the blackboard writing out the day's alphabet lesson. He turns to face his class. His eyes sweep over the children, who sit with their hands folded, waiting for instruction. In the third row, the second desk from the window is empty. It is the desk where a little girl named Hannah used to sit. Hannah, who always drew beautiful birds in the margins of her notebooks, and who always shared her apple at recess. The teacher looks at the empty wooden chair. He sees the way the morning sunlight falls across the blank surface of the desk, illuminating the small scratches and ink stains left by generations of children. The other children see it, too. They glance at the empty chair, their young faces clouded with a confusion they do not have the words to express. They know better than to ask. They have absorbed the unspoken rule of the adult world: some questions are too dangerous to speak aloud. The teacher clears his throat, a tight, painful lump forming. He offers the children a soft, reassuring smile that does not quite reach his eyes. "Let us begin our reading," he says, his voice a gentle, steady murmur. He walks down the aisle, his hand lightly brushing the back of the empty chair as he passes, a silent, fleeting blessing for the little girl with the birds in her margins. He carries the weight of her absence for the rest of the day, teaching his lessons around the hollow space she left behind. As the days turn into weeks, and the weeks into months, the neighborhood slowly absorbs the empty spaces. New families sometimes move into the vacant houses, bringing new furniture and new curtains. The forgotten milk bottles are cleared away. The dust is swept from the porches. On the surface, the street looks whole again. But those who remember know the truth. They walk down the sidewalk and see the ghosts of the past layered over the present. They hear the phantom notes of a cello drifting from a window. They see a little boy peeking out from behind a mother's skirt in the grocery store. When the evening falls and the sky turns the color of bruised velvet, they sit in their living rooms and look out at the gathering dark. They listen to the wind rustling through the bare branches of the trees, a sound that is both soothing and infinitely sad. They hold their own loved ones a little tighter, cherishing the warmth of their hands and the steady rhythm of their breathing. And sometimes, just before they close their eyes to sleep, they send a quiet, whispered thought out into the night. It is a thought that travels over the rooftops and past the clouds, a fragile, enduring hope sent into the unknown. They hope that wherever their neighbors are, they are warm. They hope they are safe. And they hope, with every quiet beat of their hearts, that someday, somehow, they will hear those familiar footsteps returning to the porch once more. Feel the heavy, rough weave of dark fabric slipping through your hands, a silent barrier pulled tight against an endless night sky. The war did not announce itself in the living rooms of ordinary streets with the roar of cannons or the trembling of the earth. It arrived much more quietly. It crept in through the radio waves, a steady, somber voice asking every household to perform a single, profound task. It asked them to erase themselves from the night. It asked them to take away the guiding lights of their homes, to hide the warm, glowing squares of their windows from the heavens above. It was the autumn of a new, uncertain era, and the air was growing crisp. The leaves were turning their familiar shades of russet and gold, falling onto sidewalks just as they always had. But the evenings were changing. The decree was simple, yet it altered the very geography of the human heart. Every pane of glass, every skylight, every tiny transom above a door had to be covered. Not a single sliver of light could be allowed to escape into the dark. And so, the war began not with a battle, but with the rustle of heavy paper, the snipping of shears, and the dragging of step stools. Imagine a small, modest living room. A husband and wife stand before their large front window, the one that looks out onto the linden trees. On the floor lies a large roll of thick, dark material. It smells faintly of chemical dye and dust, a sharp, industrial scent that feels entirely out of place in their cozy parlor. They work together in a quiet, practiced rhythm, though this is a task they have never done before. The husband measures the wooden frame with a folding ruler, calling out the numbers in a soft, low voice. The wife kneels on the carpet, her sewing shears slicing through the heavy fabric with a long, satisfying, rushing sound. They climb onto the dining chairs, reaching up to the curtain rod. They pin the dark layers over their familiar, delicate lace curtains. They press black tape along the edges of the glass, sealing every crack, every gap where the golden light of their lamps might betray them. It is an act of love, this meticulous sealing of the home. It is a desperate, physical attempt to keep danger at bay, to build a fortress out of cardboard and cloth. But as the last pin is placed, and the edges are smoothed down, a strange, heavy silence falls over the room. The husband steps down from the chair. He walks over to the table and switches on the reading lamp. Instantly, the room changes. Before, the lamplight would gently bleed out into the street, mingling with the glow of the street lamps, connecting their private space to the public world. Now, the light hits the thick black fabric and stops. It bounces back into the room, creating an atmosphere that is deeply intimate, yet undeniably claustrophobic. The world has suddenly shrunk to the exact dimensions of these four walls. There are no stars to gaze at through the glass. There is no moon casting long, silver shadows across the floorboards. The outside world has simply vanished, swallowed by a mandated emptiness. To sit in this room is to feel like you are floating in a small, glowing lifeboat on an endlessly dark ocean. The air feels thicker, warmer, but heavier to breathe. They sit down on the sofa, looking at the black squares that used to be their view of the neighborhood. The husband reaches out and takes his wife's hand. They listen. They listen to the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. They listen to the gentle settling of the floorboards. They are waiting. They do not know exactly what they are waiting for, but the act of hiding has awakened a primal, quiet anxiety within them. The blackout has brought the vast, unknown concept of the war directly into their sanctuary, condensing it into the heavy shadows in the corners of their own home. Down the hall, a little boy is lying in his bed, unable to sleep. He is used to the comforting beam of the street lamp that usually paints a soft, yellow rectangle on his bedroom wall. It was his nightlight, his silent guardian. Tonight, his room is a cavern of absolute pitch. He pulls his woolen blanket up to his nose, his eyes wide in the dark. The floorboards creak, and his mother enters the room. She carries no candle, for even a candle's flame must be guarded now. She navigates the familiar space entirely by memory, a mother's internal map of discarded wooden blocks and bedside tables. She sits on the edge of his mattress, the springs sinking softly under her weight. She can feel his small body trembling slightly beneath the covers. "It's too dark, Mama," he whispers, his voice barely a breath. She strokes his hair, her touch incredibly soft and grounding. "I know, my little bird," she murmurs. "The world has just closed its eyes for a while. That is all." She reaches into her apron pocket and pulls out a tiny, secret treasure. It is a pocket watch, old and silver, with hands painted in a delicate, luminous radium paint. She clicks it open in the hollow of her hands. A faint, ghostly green glow illuminates her palms. She holds it up to the ceiling. "Look," she whispers. "We have our own little star in here. Just for us." The little boy breathes out a soft sigh, his eyes fixing on the tiny, glowing hands of the watch. In the overwhelming darkness of a changing world, this tiny speck of light is a miracle. It is a boundary against the fear. He watches the second hand slowly tick its way around the dial, lulled by the steady rhythm and the warm scent of his mother's lavender soap, until his breathing finally slows and he drifts into sleep. Outside, the city has undergone a profound and eerie transformation. The bustling, vibrant streets of just a few months ago are completely unrecognizable. It is a landscape of ghosts. If you were to walk down the pavement, you would see nothing but the looming, black silhouettes of the buildings against a slightly paler night sky. You would not see the person walking toward you until they were close enough to brush your shoulder. People move with slow, hesitant steps, their hands outstretched, feeling their way along the cold brick walls and wrought iron fences. Bicycles slide through the dark like phantoms, their bells muted. The only sound is the hushed scraping of leather soles on stone, and the occasional, muffled tap of a walking stick. And then, there is the voice of the air raid warden. He is a solitary figure patrolling the deep shadows, his eyes scanning the facades of the buildings for any sign of life. "Put that light out," he calls out, his voice a sharp, sudden hiss in the quiet. He has spotted a tiny sliver of gold leaking from a third-story window where a curtain has not been taped securely enough. Inside that room, an elderly woman frantically pinches the heavy fabric together, her heart fluttering like a trapped bird. She whispers apologies to the dark, her frail hand smoothing the heavy velvet until the leak is sealed. The light vanishes. The street returns to absolute, impenetrable black. In another apartment across the city, a young woman sits on the floor of her bathroom, the only room without an exterior window. She has placed a rolled-up towel under the crack of the door to trap the light. She sits cross-legged on the cold, hexagonal tiles, a single, stubby candle flickering on the edge of the porcelain bathtub. In her lap rests a letter from her fiancé, who has been sent away to the borders. She reads the words by the dancing candlelight. The amber shadows of the room sway and pulse around her. He writes about the beauty of the countryside, about the comradeship of his friends, attempting to shield her from his own anxieties. But she reads between the lines. She feels the immense distance between them, a distance that feels magnified 1,000 times by the blackout isolating her in this tiny, tiled room. She presses the folded letter to her chest, closing her eyes, wishing she could send the warmth of her small candle across the miles. She imagines it as a beacon in the night, cutting through the dense forest and the quiet fields, to guide him safely back to her. As the night stretches on, the quiet anxiety of waiting becomes a shared heartbeat beneath the roofs of the city. Behind thousands of drawn curtains, ordinary people sit in their illuminated cocoons. They knit wool socks, they mend torn collars, they read old books with soft, worn pages, listening to the heavy silence pressing against the glass. They are learning to live within the boundaries of a single room. They are learning that safety now means becoming invisible. The war has not yet brought the terror of falling skies to their doors, but it has stolen the stars. It has taken the moonlit streets, the comforting glow of the neighbor's porch, and the gentle guidance of the street lamps. But inside, behind the thick paper and the heavy cloth, the human spirit continues to tend its own quiet fires. They wrap themselves in woolen blankets. They lean their heads on the shoulders of their loved ones. They surrender to the strange, enclosed night, sleeping behind their fortress of fabric. They breathe softly in the warm, captured light, trusting in the quiet strength of the people beside them, simply waiting for the morning sun to finally pierce the dark and bring the world back to life. Listen for the hollow rattle of the letter slot, a small sound that carries the weight of 1,000 miles and a single, beating heart. In the quiet hours of the morning, when the mist still clings to the eaves of the houses and the streets are soft with the gray light of dawn, the most important person in the world is a man with a heavy leather bag and a steady, rhythmic gait. He is the postman, and in this time of great distance and deepening shadows, he is the weaver of invisible threads. He carries in his satchel a collection of paper phantoms, fragile, folded remnants of fathers, sons, and brothers, sent from places so far away they feel like the edge of the world. Imagine a woman named Elsbeth. She is standing in her small kitchen, her hands resting on the cool, scrubbed wood of the table. The house is still. The children have gone to school, their laughter lingering like a faint scent in the hallway. She is waiting. She does not look at the clock, but she knows exactly where the postman is. She hears the faint squeak of his bicycle brakes at the corner, the soft thud of a gate closing 3 houses down. And then, the sound that makes the world stop, the metallic clatter of the flap on her own front door. She walks to the hallway with a slow, deliberate step, her breath held tight in her chest. On the floor, resting on the worn rug, lies a small, rectangular envelope. It is made of thin, cheap paper, slightly gray, and it bears the stamp of the field post. For a moment, she does not pick it up. She simply looks at it, as if the paper itself might be too hot or too cold to touch. This is her lifeline. This is the only proof she has that the man she loves is still breathing, still thinking of her, still existing in a world that has become a vast, unmapped dark. When she finally lifts it, her fingers tremble just a fraction. She carries it back to the kitchen, to the chair by the window where the light is clearest. She opens it carefully, not wanting to tear a single fiber of the paper. Inside, the pages are covered in a hurried, familiar script. The ink is sometimes faint, sometimes smudged, as if the pen were struggling against the cold or the wind. The letter begins, as they all do, with a quiet reassurance. My dearest Elsbeth, I am well. I am safe. Do not worry for me. She reads these words and lets out a long, shuddering sigh. But then, she begins the work of a different kind of reading. She reads between the lines. She looks at the way the letters slant when he is tired. She notices a small, circular stain on the corner, perhaps a drop of rain, or a splash of soup, or perhaps something else. She searches for the things he does not say. He writes of the weather, describing a sky that is vast and empty. He writes of a stray cat that has taken to sleeping in their camp, a small, ginger creature that reminds him of the one they had years ago. He writes about the taste of a crust of bread, or the way the mud smells like old iron. These are the small, mundane anchors he sends home. He does not write of the thunder of the guns or the terrifying cold that seeps into the marrow of the bone. He protects her with his silence. He creates a paper version of himself that is calm, steady, and gentle. And she, in turn, performs the same quiet mercy for him. Later that evening, after the blackout curtains are drawn and the lamp is turned low, Elsbeth sits at the table with her own pen. The paper before her is a pale, soft blue. She chooses her words with the care of a poet. She tells him about the children's grades. She tells him that the plum tree in the yard has finally blossomed, its white petals looking like a dusting of late snow. She tells him that she saved a piece of chocolate from her ration and shared it with his mother. She does not tell him about the way the house feels cavernous and hollow at night. She does not tell him about the sharp, sudden pang of fear she feels every time a car slows down in the street. She does not tell him that she sleeps on his side of the bed because it still smells, very faintly, of his shaving soap and the cedar of his closet. She writes a letter filled with the light of home, a paper phantom of the kitchen, the garden, and the warmth of the hearth. She is building a bridge of ink and hope, trying to reach across the distance to pull him back to a world where things are simple and kind. In this way, the mailbox becomes a sacred space. It is a portal between two lives that have been torn apart. Across the country, in every village and every city block, thousands of people are doing the same. There is a collective, silent conversation happening through the mail, a nation of people whispering to each other through the post, trying to keep the fire of their humanity burning against a freezing wind. There is a particular beauty in the things tucked inside these envelopes. A pressed wildflower from a field in the east, its petals dried to the color of old parchment. A lock of a child's hair, tied with a bit of sewing thread. A small, hand-drawn map of a future garden, sketched on the back of a ration card. These are the treasures of the war. They have no value to the state, no place in the history books, but they are the only things that truly matter. They are the small, soft bricks of the heart, being sent back and forth to keep a home standing even when the walls are miles away. But there is a shadow to the paper phantom. It is the shadow of the letter that does not arrive. Imagine a week passing, then 10 days, then 2 weeks. The postman comes and goes. He delivers a bill, a postcard from an aunt, a government notice. But the thin, gray envelope with the familiar handwriting is missing. The silence of the mailbox is a terrible, living thing. It sits in the hallway like a heavy stone. Elsbeth begins to watch the street with a feverish intensity. She cleans the windows 3 times a day just to have a reason to stand by the glass. Every time the gate creaks, her heart leaps into her throat, only to fall back down, heavier than before. The dread is not a loud scream, it is a slow, cold rising of water. It is the way she stops herself from looking at his photograph on the mantel. It is the way she finds herself unable to finish her sentences. The silence of the mail is a phantom that haunts her sleep, whispering possibilities that she refuses to name. She tells herself the trains are slow. She tells herself the weather has turned. She tells herself he is simply busy, perhaps moving to a new place where the post cannot find him. She clings to these excuses as if they were life rafts. And then, there are the acts of quiet heroism among those who wait. One afternoon, Elsbeth's neighbor, Frau Schmidt, comes to the door. Frau Schmidt is an older woman, her face lined with the sorrows of 2 wars. She sees the way Elsbeth is standing, the way her hands are clenched in her apron. She does not ask if there has been news. She knows. Instead, Frau Schmidt reaches into her pocket and pulls out a small, dried apple. "I found this at the bottom of the bin," she says softly, her voice like the rustle of dry leaves. "I thought the children might like it. Or perhaps you could bake it with a little cinnamon." She stays for a cup of tea. They do not talk about the front. They do not talk about the missing letters. They talk about the difficulty of finding good thread and the way the birds are returning to the park. It is a small, quiet kindness, a way of holding Elsbeth's hand through the silence without saying a word. It is the heroism of presence, the grace of being there when the paper bridge seems to be crumbling. In a dugout far away, the man who wrote to Elsbeth sits by a flickering candle. He is holding her latest blue letter. It is worn at the edges, the paper soft from being read and reread 100 times. He breathes in the scent of it, imagining he can smell the lavender she keeps in the linens or the faint, sweet smell of the kitchen. To him, this piece of paper is more real than the frozen ground or the dark sky. It is his proof that he is still a husband, still a father, still a man who belongs to a place where people plant plum trees and save chocolate. He tucks the letter into his tunic, right over his heart. It is his armor. It is a paper phantom that protects his soul from the hardness of the world around him. He picks up his pen to begin again. "My dearest Elsbeth." As the years crawl by, these letters become a vast, invisible library of the human heart. Some are lost in the rain. Some are burned in the fires. Some are kept in wooden boxes for decades, their ink fading until the words are like ghosts. But in the moment of their sending and their receiving, they are the most powerful things in existence. They are the no that ordinary people say to the cruelty of history. They are the refusal to be separated. They are the quiet, whispered proof that love can be folded into a small rectangle and sent through the dark, and that even a paper phantom can have enough strength to lead a person home. The night settles over Elsbeth's house once more. She lies in bed, her hand resting on the empty pillow beside her. In her mind, she sees the postman turning the corner. She sees the leather bag. She sees a thin, gray envelope, marked with her name in a hand that is steady and strong. She lets this image carry her into sleep. She dreams of the rattle of the letter slot. She dreams of the paper phantom. And in the dream, the bridge is solid, the ink is dark and clear, and the silence is finally, gently, broken. Sleep now, and listen to the wind in the eaves. Somewhere, a pen is moving across a page. Somewhere, a letter is being folded. Somewhere, a heart is waiting for the sound of a gate. The paper phantoms are flying through the night, carrying the light of home to the places where it is needed most. Think of the way a meadow looks just before the mowers arrive, golden, swaying, and full of a wild, unhurried light that seems as though it could last forever. Childhood is meant to be a slow season. It is a time of chasing grasshoppers through tall weeds, of the sweet, sticky taste of sun-warmed berries, and the simple, profound magic of a wooden hoop rolling down a dusty lane. It is a world where the only clock is the fading of the sun and the only duty is to grow. But in these years, for the children of the towns and the villages, the slow season was being hurried along. A new rhythm was being tapped out on the drums, and the gentle, wandering paths of play were being straightened into long, rigid lines. Imagine a bright July morning in a quiet neighborhood. The air is still and sweet with the scent of blooming jasmine. In a sun-bathed kitchen, a mother is packing a small canvas rucksack. She tucks in a clean, iron shirt, a pair of thick woolen socks she knitted by the fire, and a heel of brown bread wrapped in a white cloth. Her movements are efficient, but her eyes are heavy with a quiet, lingering sorrow. She pauses for a moment, her hand resting on the rough canvas. Outside, her 12-year-old son is waiting on the front porch. He is wearing a new uniform, the fabric stiff and smelling of the factory. He is standing a little taller than he did yesterday, his chin tilted upward, watching the street for his friends. To him, this is an adventure. It is the promise of campfires, of mountains he has never climbed, and the intoxicating feeling of belonging to something vast and powerful. He does not see the shadows in his mother's eyes. He only sees the bright, shimmering horizon. The mother comes to the door and hands him the pack. She reaches out to smooth a stray lock of hair from his forehead, a gesture she has made 1,000 times, but he pulls back just a fraction, a small, instinctive movement toward a new, hardened independence. "Be careful, Carl," she whispers, her voice a soft prayer. "Remember to wear your scarf if the nights get cold. And write to me." He nods, gives her a quick, distracted hug, and runs down the steps to join the group of boys gathering at the corner. She stays in the doorway, her hand gripping the wooden frame, watching until the flash of his uniform disappears around the bend. She goes back inside to a house that suddenly feels too quiet, too empty. She picks up his old wooden slingshot from the kitchen chair and holds it against her heart, a relic of a childhood that is being traded for a drumbeat. This is the quiet heartbreak of a generation of parents, watching their children march away into a world that is teaching them to forget the language of the hearth and learn only the language of the march. As the boys reach the edge of the town, the natural world greets them. They hike through forests of ancient, towering pines where the light filters down in soft, green shafts. They swim in rivers so cold they make the skin tingle, their laughter rising like bright sparks into the summer air. In these moments, they are still just children. They are boys who compete to see who can find the largest pine cone or who can skip a stone the most times across a glassy lake. But as the sun begins to set, the camp changes. The play is set aside. They gather in perfect, hushed circles. They listen to stories of glory and ancient heroes, stories that are designed to sharpen their soft edges and turn their natural empathy into a hard, unyielding steel. They sing songs that are beautiful and haunting, but the words are full of fire and iron. One night, sitting by the dying embers of a campfire, a boy named Hans looks up at the stars. Beside him, his friend Peter is whittling a piece of cedar. Peter is a quiet boy, a boy who used to spend his afternoons sketching the birds in the park. "Do you think it will be like the stories, Peter?" Hans asked softly, his voice barely a murmur beneath the sighing of the wind in the trees. "The battles? The glory?" Peter stops whittling. He looks at the small wooden bird in his hand, then out at the dark wall of the forest. "I don't know," he says, his voice small and uncertain. "I think I'd rather just stay here in the woods. I like the way the trees don't ask anything of you." They sit in silence for a long time, two small figures dwarfed by the immense, indifferent night. In that moment, the uniform feels heavy, too big for their narrow shoulders. They are caught between the world they were born for and the world that is being built for them. It is a fragile, fleeting moment of doubt, a ghost of their old selves, before the whistle blows for the morning march and the lines form once again. While the boys are in the mountains, the girls are in the meadows. They are taught to weave wreaths of wildflowers, to bake bread, and to sing the old folk songs of the land. It looks, to an outsider, like a return to a simpler, more virtuous time. They move in graceful circles on the grass, their braided hair catching the golden light of the late afternoon. But even here, the theft is taking place. The grace is being measured. The songs are being curated. In a village schoolhouse, a young girl named Greta sits at her desk. She is supposed to be writing a poem about the beauty of the homeland. But her eyes keep drifting to the window, to the old apple tree where she used to spend her summers reading stories of far-off lands and magical creatures. Greta's teacher, a woman with a kind face and tired eyes, walks through the rows of desks. She stops at Greta's side and sees that the page is blank. She knows that Greta's father was a man who loved books, a man who taught his daughter that the world was wide and full of many different voices. She also knows that those books are no longer allowed in the school. The teacher leans down, her voice a gentle, protective whisper. The words will come, Greta. Just look at the flowers in the garden. Think of the way the bees hum. She rests a hand briefly on the girl's shoulder, a secret gesture of understanding. She is telling her to hide her true thoughts, to find safety in the simple things, to survive by becoming a quiet observer of the world. Greta looks up and sees the sadness in her teacher's eyes, a reflection of her mother's sorrow. She picks up her pen and begins to write about the apple blossoms, her heart learning the bitter lesson of the mask. As the summer draws to a close, the children return to their homes. They are tanner, stronger, and their movements are more certain. But when they walk through their front doors, their parents see a change that no amount of scrubbing can wash away. Carl comes home to his mother. He tells her of the mountains and the long marches. He speaks of the strength of his group and the importance of the tasks they were given. He uses words that are too old for him, words that feel like cold stones in his mouth. He no longer asks for the bedtime stories she used to tell. He sits at the table, his back straight, his eyes fixed on some distant point. His mother serves him his favorite soup, but he eats it with a mechanical efficiency, his mind already back in the camp, back in the lines. She reaches out to touch his hand, and he doesn't pull away this time, but his hand feels distant, as if he is already miles away. The intimacy of their old life has been replaced by a polite, hollow respect. She realizes, with a crushing weight in her chest, that her son is becoming a stranger in his own home. He is being taught to belong to the state before he belongs to his family. Yet, even in this hardening world, the light of youth is difficult to extinguish entirely. Late at night, when the house is dark and the only sound is the wind in the chimney, Carl lies in his bed. He reaches under his pillow and pulls out a small, worn object. It is a polished river stone, perfectly round and smooth, that he found during the summer hike. He runs his thumb over the cool surface of the stone. He remembers the sound of the water, the way the sun felt on his back, and the way he and Peter laughed when they both slipped into the stream. In the dark, without the uniform, without the songs, he is just a boy who likes the feel of a smooth stone in his palm. He holds onto the stone as if it were an anchor, a tiny piece of the natural, unregimented world he is trying not to forget. These are the stolen summers, the years where the natural curiosity and kindness of youth were channeled into a narrow, dark corridor. The innocence was not lost all at once, it was taken in small increments, and every march, every song, and every lesson that taught them to look at their neighbors with suspicion instead of wonder. Think of the millions of parents sitting in the quiet of their kitchens, listening to the rhythmic tramp of feet on the pavement outside. They are the silent witnesses to a tragedy they are powerless to stop. They provide the warm meals, they mend the uniforms, and they offer the gentle smiles, all while their hearts are breaking for the children who are being led away from the light of the hearth and into the gathering gloom. But the memory of the slow season remains. It lives in the hidden river stones, in the unwritten poems about apple blossoms, and in the secret glances between teachers and students. It is a reminder that there is a part of the human spirit that can never be fully marched into submission. As the autumn leaves begin to fall, covering the cobblestones with a blanket of red and gold, the children of the towns prepare for a new year of lessons. The world outside is growing colder, and the shadows are lengthening. But in the quiet hours of the night, when the dreams take over, they are still children. They are still chasing grasshoppers in the wild, unmeasured meadows. They are still skipping stones across the glassy lakes of their memories, holding on to the last, fading warmth of a stolen summer. Sleep now, and let the rhythmic sound of the wind be your only march. The woods are deep and still, and the stars are watching over the rooftops. Somewhere, a child is holding a smooth stone in their sleep, dreaming of a world where the only duty is to be kind, and the only path is the one that leads gently home. The frost does not merely sit upon the glass, it grows like a secret, crystal map of a world that has finally, irrevocably, begun to freeze. Outside, the sky is the color of a tarnished silver spoon, heavy and low, pressing down upon the jagged rooftops and the skeletal branches of the linden trees. There is a new kind of silence in the air this winter. It is not the peaceful hush that usually follows a fresh snowfall, but a thin, brittle quiet that feels as though it might shatter if anyone dared to speak too loudly. The wind no longer sighs through the eaves, it moans, a long, low sound that carries the scent of iron and the distant, biting cold of the great, empty spaces to the east. In a small kitchen at the back of an old apartment building, a woman named Marta stands by the stove. She is wrapped in 3 layers of wool, a thin cardigan, a heavy knitted shawl, and over that, her husband's old overcoat, its sleeves rolled up past her wrists. The stove is cold. The black iron, once the warm, pulsing heart of the home, is now just a silent, icy monument. She has only a few precious briquettes of coal left in the wooden bin, and she is saving them for the deepest part of the night, when the temperature drops so low that the water in the wash basin turns to a solid, milky disk. Marta lifts a small tin pot and pours a cup of hot water. It isn't real coffee, or even tea. It is a brew made from roasted acorns and dry chicory, dark and bitter. She cups her hands around the porcelain mug, not to drink it, but to steal every flickering spark of warmth from the steam. She watches her own breath bloom in front of her face, a small, white ghost that vanishes into the shadows of the ceiling. There is a strange realization settling in Marta's chest, a feeling as cold and sharp as the ice on the window pane. For a long time, the news from the radio and the voices in the street spoke only of springtime and triumphs, of a world that was expanding and glowing with a borrowed light. But this winter, the light has changed. It is fading. The voices on the radio have grown somber, their rhythmic shouting replaced by a slow, heavy gravity. She looks at the window, at the intricate patterns of the frost. It looks like ferns, or like the feathers of a giant, frozen bird. She remembers a time, years ago, when she would stand with her children and use a warm copper coin to melt a small, round porthole through the ice so they could look at the Christmas lights in the square. Now, she leaves the frost untouched. It is a curtain. It is a barrier. It keeps the gray, hardening world outside, and it keeps her small, private world hidden within. On the wooden table lies an old coat belonging to her youngest son. It is a beautiful deep navy, but the elbows have worn through to the lining, and the hem is frayed from years of chasing through the park. Marta picks up a bone needle and a length of coarse, gray thread. Her fingers are stiff, the joints aching from the dampness that lives in the walls now, but she begins to sew. The scratch of the needle through the heavy wool is the only sound in the room. Each stitch is a quiet, rhythmic prayer. She is not just mending a coat, she is trying to sew the world back together. She is reinforcing the seams of her family's life, trying to make them strong enough to withstand the wind that is beginning to howl through the cracks of the regime. She thinks of her son, who is no longer a boy in a navy coat, but a soldier in a gray one, somewhere in the vastness where the sun never seems to rise. The letters that come from the east have changed their tone. They no longer speak of the grandeur of the march or the excitement of new lands. Now, they speak of the sound of boots crunching on frozen mud. They speak of the way the soup freezes in the tin before it can be eaten. They speak of the longing for a real bed, for the smell of a clean kitchen, and for the sound of a mother's voice. In the spaces between the words, Marta hears the truth that no one is allowed to say aloud: the tide has turned. The great, dark wave that swept out across the world is now pulling back, and it is bringing a bitter, unforgiving winter with it. Marta finishes the elbow patch, her thread snapping with a tiny, sharp sound. She smooths the fabric with her palm. The coat is older now, heavier with the weight of the repairs, but it is warm. That is all that matters. Survival has become a quiet, daily labor, a matter of patches and chicory and the careful rationing of a single candle. Later that afternoon, a neighbor, Frau Hauer, knocks softly on the door. She doesn't come to borrow sugar or to gossip, as she might have done in the summers of the past. She comes simply to sit. She brings her own shawl and a small bundle of dry twigs she found in the park. They sit together in the kitchen, two shadows in the gathering twilight. The coal man didn't come to the corner today, Frau Hauer says, her voice a low, dry whisper. Marta nods. I heard. The trains are being used for other things now. They don't say what those other things are. They don't have to. They both know that the machinery of the world is no longer concerned with the warmth of a kitchen in a quiet street. They sit in silence for a long time, watching the sky turn from silver to a deep, bruised charcoal. Do you remember the lights? Frau Hauer asked suddenly. The way the shop windows used to glow all the way down the Friedrichstrasse? You could see the reflections in the snow like jewels. Marta smiles, a small, fragile thing. I remember. And the smell of the roasted chestnuts. You could feel the heat from the braziers 3 blocks away. The memory of warmth is almost as good as the warmth itself. They cling to these stories like embers. In this new world of blackout curtains and empty bins, the past has become a sanctuary. They trade memories like precious stones, polishing them with their words until they shine against the dark. This is a small, everyday heroism, the refusal to let the bitterness of the present erase the sweetness of what was. As Frau Hauer gets up to leave, she pauses at the door. She reaches into her pocket and pulls out a small, wrinkled potato. It is tiny, barely the size of a plum, but she presses it into Marta's hand. For the soup tonight, she whispers. I have 2 more. My sister sent them from the farm. Marta feels the cool, earthy skin of the potato in her palm. It is a gift of immense proportions. In a world that is shrinking, in a world that is growing suspicious and cold, this small act of sharing is a defiance of the dark. It is a reminder that the bonds of neighborly love are stronger than the ice. She thanks her friend with a squeeze of the hand, and for a moment, the kitchen doesn't feel quite so cold. The night falls early and stays late. Marta finally allows herself to light the small coal fire in the stove. She watches the first blue flames lick around the black briquettes, a tiny, flickering dance of heat. She sits close to the iron, her knees almost touching the door, and watches the glow reflect in the frost on the window. The frost has grown thicker since the sun went down. It has begun to climb toward the center of the pane, closing the last remaining gaps of clear glass. It feels as though the house is being encased in a shell of ice. As she sits there, Marta feels a creeping realization, a shadow at the back of her mind that she can no longer push away. The darkest days are not behind them. They are coming. She can feel it in the way the wind rattles the glass, and in the way the street lamps outside seem to burn with a dim, flickering uncertainty. The promise of the 1,000-year spring has withered, replaced by a winter that feels like it might never end. She thinks of the people she knows, the baker who no longer has white flour, the schoolteacher who has stopped talking about history, the children who march with faces that have grown too hard and too old. They are all like her, huddling around small fires, mending old coats, and watching the frost. They are all beginning to see the cracks in the ice. They are all beginning to realize that the world they were told was being built for them is instead a world that is slowly falling apart. But even in this realization, there is a strange, quiet resilience. Marta leans her head back against the wall and closes her eyes. She listens to the low hum of the fire. She thinks of the navy coat, mended and ready. She thinks of the small potato in the soup pot. She thinks of the warmth of Frau Hauer's hand. The frost may map out a world of ice, but it cannot reach the warmth that ordinary people hold for one another in the dark. They will endure the shivering. They will sew the patches. They will wait out the long, bitter night, holding onto the small, flickering embers of their humanity until the sun finally finds the strength to return. Marta pulls her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The fire is low now, the coals glowing a deep, pulsing red like a heartbeat. She watches the last of the white steam rise from her mug. The world outside is a vast, frozen silence, but here, in the heart of the kitchen, there is a lingering, stubborn hope. It is a hope that doesn't shout, it whispers. It whispers of a spring that must eventually come, even if it is a spring that blooms among ruins. She blows out the candle, and the room is plunged into a soft, velvety dark. The only thing visible is the frost on the window, shining with a pale, ghostly light from the moon. It is beautiful, in its own cold and terrifying way. Marta climbs into her bed, pulling the heavy quilts up to her chin, listening to the wind and the silence, waiting for the dawn. Look closely at the hearth long after the fire has died, and you will find that beneath the suffocating weight of the gray ash, a single, defiant spark still breathes. There is a profound and heavy silence that falls over a city when kindness becomes a crime. It is a quiet that seeps into the brickwork, that settles like a fine dust on the windowsills, and that changes the very way people walk down their own streets. In this darkened era, the air is thick with a chilling suspicion. Eyes are cast downward. Conversations are stripped to the barest, safest bones of the weather and the day's labor. The world has been told to forget the soft, gentle impulses of the human heart, and to embrace a cold, unyielding iron. But iron, no matter how heavy, cannot completely smother the light of the soul. Beneath the terrifying, uniform grayness of these years, hidden deep within the ordinary folds of daily life, there is a beautiful, secret constellation of sparks. They are the quietest acts of rebellion. They are the moments when ordinary men and women, terrified and exhausted, choose to reach through the dark and remind themselves, and others, that they are still human. Imagine a pale, freezing morning just as the sky begins to turn the color of bruised slate. The cobblestones are slick with a thin layer of frost. A young woman named Clara is walking to her job at a local textile mill. She wears a coat that is too thin for the wind, her hands thrust deep into her pockets to keep her fingers from going numb. In her right pocket, wrapped in a piece of rough brown paper, is her lunch. It is a single slice of dense, dark bread, and a small, wrinkled apple. It is not much, barely enough to sustain her through the long hours at the looms, but it is all she has. As she approaches the edge of the industrial district, she sees them. It is a work detail, men brought from far away, men whose faces are hollowed out by a hunger so deep it looks like a physical wound. They are repairing a stretch of rail line, their thin, ragged clothes offering no protection against the biting cold. Standing nearby are the guards, their boots polished, their eyes sharp and watchful. Clara feels a familiar, sickening knot of fear tighten in her stomach. The law is absolute, there is to be no contact. No speaking. No looking. And certainly, no sharing. To even pause is to invite the heavy hand of the regime upon her own shoulder. The easiest thing to do, the thing she has been trained to do, is to look away, to hurry her steps, to protect herself. But as she walks past, she catches the eye of one of the men. He is young, perhaps no older than her own brother, and he is shivering so violently that the heavy iron tool in his hands trembles. In his eyes, Clara sees an ocean of despair. She does not break her stride. She does not turn her head. But as she passes a stack of wooden railway ties, just out of the direct line of the guard's vision, she gently, deliberately pulls her hand from her pocket. She lets the small, paper-wrapped package fall from her fingers. It lands softly on the frosted wood. She keeps walking. Her heart is hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, a wild, terrifying drumbeat of sheer panic. She expects a shout. She expects a hand to grab her arm. She walks until she turns the corner, her breath coming in short, frightened gasps. It was an action that took less than a second. It will never be recorded in any ledger. But in that fleeting moment, Clara risked her freedom, perhaps her very life, to give away her only meal. And back on the frosty wood, a freezing man finds a small parcel of bread, and with it, the profound, life-saving knowledge that in a world of profound cruelty, someone still saw him. Someone still cared. It is a spark beneath the ashes, keeping his spirit warm for one more day. These moments of everyday heroism are woven into the very fabric of the city, invisible to those who only look for grand, sweeping gestures. They happen in the spaces between heartbeats. Step onto a crowded tram in the late afternoon. The carriage is swaying gently, the metal wheels singing a high, rhythmic song against the tracks. The air inside is thick with the smell of damp wool, wet newspaper, and the exhaustion of a long day. The passengers stand shoulder to shoulder, holding onto the leather straps, their faces blank masks of self-preservation. The tram stops, and the heavy doors hiss open. An older man steps aboard. He wears a worn gray hat and carries a battered briefcase. And sewn to the breast of his coat, unmistakable and bright, is a yellow star. Instantly, the atmosphere in the carriage changes. It is a physical sensation, like the sudden dropping of the temperature in a room. The crowd parts. The people standing near him subtly shift their weight, pulling their coats tighter, turning their backs. They create a ring of empty space around him, a silent, devastating quarantine. The older man lowers his eyes to the wooden floorboards of the tram, accepting the isolation. He holds onto the metal pole, making himself as small as possible. Sitting in a window seat, just a few feet away, is a young clerk. He is an ordinary man, a man who keeps his head down, pays his rent, and listens to the radio broadcasts without comment. But today, right now, he looks at the older man standing in the center of that terrible, quiet circle. The clerk does not stand up. He does not shout a protest. To do so would only bring ruin to them both. But he does not look away. He waits until the older man briefly, hesitantly lifts his eyes from the floor. When their eyes meet, the young clerk holds the gaze. His face softens. He gives a slow, deliberate, and deeply respectful nod of his head. It is a micro-movement, a shifting of the chin that takes only a fraction of a second. But in the silent language of the oppressed, it is a shout that echoes to the heavens. It says, I see you. I see your dignity. I do not agree with this dark world. We are still brothers. The older man's breath catches in his throat. A faint, almost imperceptible warmth touches the corners of his tired eyes. He nods back, just once. The tram rattles on, carrying its passengers through the gray city streets. The circle of isolation remains, but the absolute loneliness has been broken. That single, shared glance of solidarity is a lifeline cast across a dark and freezing river. It is the quietest, most beautiful defiance. As we drift away from the city, out into the quiet expanses of the countryside, the sparks glow in deeper, more hidden places. Here, where the wind howls across the dormant, snow-covered fields, the isolation is profound. It is the middle of the night. A farmhouse stands alone at the edge of a dense pine forest. Inside, the farmer, a quiet, broad-shouldered man named Otto, is lying awake. The fire has burned down to glowing embers, and the house is filled with the deep, rhythmic breathing of his sleeping family. Suddenly, there is a sound. It is not the wind. It is a soft, desperate scratching at the heavy oak of the back door. Otto sits up in the dark. He does not light a candle. He pulls on his heavy woolen trousers and steps softly onto the cold floorboards. He walks to the door, his hand resting on the iron latch. He knows what is outside. He knows that the people running through the woods at night carry a danger that could burn his entire world to the ground. He has a wife. He has sleeping children. The logical, safe thing to do is to step away, to return to bed, and to let the wind cover the sounds of the night. But Otto remembers the words his grandfather taught him long ago, words about welcoming the stranger and sheltering the weary. He closes his eyes, says a silent, breathless prayer for forgiveness from his family, and lifts the latch. The door opens to reveal two shadows shivering in the freezing air. They are exhausted, terrified, and near the end of their strength. Otto does not ask their names. He does not ask where they have come from. He simply steps aside and ushers them into the dark kitchen. Moving entirely by memory and touch, he leads them to the pantry. He pulls back a heavy rug and lifts a wooden trapdoor that opens into the root cellar. It smells of damp earth, old potatoes, and sweet apples. It is perfectly hidden. He guides them down the wooden stairs. He returns a moment later carrying a heavy, woolen horse blanket and a half-loaf of bread. He hands it down to them in the pitch black. The wood goes deep for 10 miles out the back, Otto whispers, his voice barely a vibration in the air. Rest tonight. Tomorrow, I will leave water by the old stone wall. Thank you, a voice whispers back from the dark, trembling with a gratitude so immense it cannot be measured. Otto closes the trapdoor, replaces the rug, and sits down in the wooden chair by the dead stove. He will not sleep for the rest of the night. He sits there in the dark, guarding the secret beneath his floorboards. He is terrified. Every creak of the house sounds like heavy boots on the porch. But beneath the terror, there is a profound, unshakable peace in his soul. He has answered the deepest calling of his humanity. He has become a sanctuary in a world that has outlawed safe harbors. These are the stories that are not carved into marble monuments. They do not have parades or anthems. They are the private, hidden moments of extraordinary courage woven into the fabric of ordinary, terrifying days. Think of the woman who slips an extra ration card into the pocket of a starving neighbor. Think of the bookseller who quietly hides a forbidden book of poetry in the bottom of a shopping bag, preserving a small piece of beauty. Think of the mothers who teach their children to whisper the truth in the safety of the dark, keeping the memory of a gentler world alive in the minds of the young. This everyday resistance is not a roaring fire. It cannot burn down the regime or stop the marching boots. But it is a spark. And a spark is all that is needed to prove that the ash has not won. It is the quiet, stubborn refusal to let the heart turn to stone. As you lie in the quiet of your own room, listening to the gentle rhythm of your breathing, think of these brave, ordinary souls. Think of Clara's trembling hand dropping the bread. Think of the clerk's gentle nod on the swaying tram. Think of Otto sitting in the dark kitchen, keeping watch over the strangers in his cellar. They walked through a world of suffocating shadows, but they carried the light within them. They protected it with their silence, and they shared it in the smallest, most terrifying moments of grace. They are the beautiful, enduring proof that even in the darkest of nights, human decency cannot be entirely extinguished. Let the memory of their quiet courage wrap around you like a warm, protective blanket. The world can be cold, and the shadows can be long, but the sparks are always there, waiting beneath the ashes, ready to warm the hands of anyone who takes the time to seek them out. Rest your eyes now, and surrender to the peaceful dark, knowing that the light of the human spirit is resilient, beautiful, and forever safe. Feel the deep, rhythmic vibration in the cold stone steps, a heavy, distant drumming that sends an entire city walking quietly down into the protective embrace of the earth. There is a sound that belongs only to the deepest parts of the night in these years. It is not the sudden, sharp cry of panic, but rather the low, mournful wail of the sirens, a sweeping tone that rises and falls like the breathing of a massive, weary beast. When this sound bleeds through the blackout curtains and into the freezing bedrooms, it does not bring chaos. It brings a profound, exhausted choreography. In the dark, heavy woolen blankets are thrown back. Feet find worn slippers. Hands, working entirely by the memory of 100 previous nights, reach out in the pitch black to find the small, cardboard suitcases kept perfectly packed beside the door. These little cases hold the distillation of an entire life, a bundle of birth certificates, a handful of family photographs, a tin box of cash, and perhaps a child's beloved, threadbare cloth bear. Watch as a mother softly touches the shoulder of her sleeping child. She does not shake him awake, she strokes his cheek, her voice a gentle, practiced murmur. It is time, my love. We are going downstairs for a little while. The descent begins. Out in the hallways of the apartment buildings, neighbors emerge from their doors like quiet ghosts. There are no greetings, only the shuffling of leather soles on wooden stairs. Down, down they go, leaving the fragile world of glass and plaster behind, walking into the damp, limestone-scented air of the cellar. Before the world above grew loud, this space was a place of quiet preservation. It smelled of earth, of stored potatoes, and of sweet, dark jars of plum preserves sitting on dusty wooden shelves. Now, it has been transformed into a sanctuary of bare survival. Heavy wooden beams have been wedged against the ceiling to brace the floor above. The windows at street level have been bricked up. The only light comes from a solitary kerosene lantern hanging from a rusted hook, casting a wavering, golden circle that struggles to push back the encroaching shadows. The people step into this golden circle and find their places. They sit on overturned wooden crates, on folding canvas chairs, or simply on the cold concrete floor, pulling their heavy coats tightly around their knees. Look at the faces illuminated by the flickering light. They are a portrait of an entire society, stripped of all its daylight divisions. The wealthy banker sits shoulder to shoulder with the woman who scrubs the steps of the municipal building. The strict, unsmiling schoolmaster sits beside the young, terrified apprentice. Down here, beneath the paving stones, the uniforms, the titles, and the carefully constructed public masks simply dissolve. They are no longer citizens of a grand, terrifying empire. They are simply human beings, fragile and soft, sharing the same heavy air and the same quiet, desperate hope. For a long time, there is only the waiting. It is a waiting so dense you feel you could reach out and touch it. The silence in the cellar is broken only by the sound of collective breathing, the occasional dry cough, or the restless shifting of a child. And then, it begins. It does not start with a crash, but with a feeling in the soles of the feet. It is a low, trembling hum that travels through the bedrock of the city. The air pressure in the small, enclosed room shifts, popping the ears and pressing gently against the chest. The distant thuds are muffled by the layers of earth and stone, sounding like massive doors slamming shut in an empty mansion miles away. The hanging lantern begins to sway. The shadows dance wildly across the whitewashed brick walls. From the wooden beams above, a fine, powdery dust begins to fall. It drifts down through the golden light like a dry, gray snow, settling on the shoulders of dark coats and the tops of bowed heads. It is a terrifying thing, to sit in the dark and feel the world above you breaking apart. The instinct is to run, to scream, to push against the heavy iron door. But the people in the cellar do not scream. They perform an act of everyday heroism so profound, so heartbreakingly beautiful, that it defies the violence outside. They turn inward. They create a bubble of quiet grace in the very center of the storm. In the corner, sitting on a thin mattress laid over the concrete, is a young mother named Clara. She has her arms wrapped entirely around her 6-year-old daughter, shielding the child's small body with her own. The little girl is trembling, her face buried in the coarse wool of her mother's sweater, her hands clutching the fabric with a desperate, white-knuckled grip. The walls shudder violently as a heavy vibration rolls through the earth. The girl lets out a soft, terrified whimper. Clara does not look up at the ceiling. She lowers her head, pressing her lips directly against her daughter's soft hair. She closes her eyes, shutting out the swaying shadows and the falling dust, and she begins to whisper. Her voice is a miracle of control. It is steady, melodic, and impossibly calm. She does not talk about the sirens or the shaking. She talks about the summer. Do you remember the garden at your grandfather's house? Clara murmurs, her breath warm against the child's ear. Do you remember the way the sunflowers grew so tall they looked like they were trying to touch the clouds? The little girl nods slightly, her face still hidden. They were so bright, Clara continues, her voice a soothing river of words. Like spun gold. And the bees would hum around them all afternoon. It was such a lazy, sleepy sound. Like a long, warm sigh. As another tremor shakes the floorboards, Clara gently rocks her daughter back and forth, matching the rhythm of her swing to the cadence of her story. She is building an invisible fortress out of memories. She is taking her child away from the damp, suffocating cellar and carrying her to a place where the sun is warm and the air smells of blooming thyme and wet grass. And the lake, Clara whispers, stroking the child's back in slow, even circles. The water was so clear you could see the smooth, white stones at the bottom. We will go back there. We will sit on the wooden dock, and we will put our feet in the cool water, and we will watch the dragonflies dancing. This is the lullaby of the cellar. It is a mother pouring every ounce of her own courage into the soul of her child, absorbing the terror of the night so that her little one does not have to. To maintain a voice so soft and a hand so steady while the earth shakes is a triumph of love over fear. The little girl's trembling slowly begins to ease. Her breathing falls into the rhythm of her mother's chest, lulled by the promise of sunflowers and still waters. Just across the narrow aisle, another quiet story is unfolding. Sitting on a wooden crate is an elderly man named Herr Bauer. He has lived a long life, weathered storms of his own, and his hands rest heavily on the curved wooden handle of his walking cane. Next to him sits a young woman he has never met before tonight. She is perhaps 20 years old, far away from her family, trapped in the city by the demands of her factory work. The young woman is staring straight ahead, her eyes wide and unblinking, her breathing shallow and fast. She is caught in the grip of a silent, overwhelming panic. When the brightest, closest tremor hits, shaking the dust loose in a thick cloud and making the lantern glass rattle sharply against its metal cage, the young woman squeezes her eyes shut, a single tear escaping to cut a clean path through the limestone dust on her cheek. Herr Bauer does not offer hollow words of comfort. He knows that telling someone not to be afraid in the dark is a useless thing. Instead, with a slow, deliberate movement born of deep empathy, he takes his hand off his cane. His hand is withered, spotted with age, the skin thin and fragile like old parchment. He reaches across the few inches of empty space between them, and he gently places his hand over hers. He does not squeeze. He simply lets the weight and the warmth of his hand rest there. The young woman gasps softly, her eyes flying open. She looks down at the old, steady hand covering her own shaking fingers. And then, she looks up into Herr Bauer's face. In the dim, flickering light, he gives her a small, gentle nod. His eyes are infinitely kind, holding a quiet strength that has endured decades of hardship. The message is unspoken, but it is deeply understood. I am here. We are here together. You do not have to carry this terror alone. The young woman turns her hand over, slowly entwining her fingers with his. She holds onto this stranger as if he were an anchor in a raging sea. They sit in the dim cellar, two people from entirely different ends of life, holding hands while the dust falls around them. In a world above that is intent on tearing humanity apart, down here in the dark, humanity is fiercely, desperately stitching itself back together. As the hours stretch on, these small moments of grace continue to bloom in the shadows. A thermos of weak tea is passed down the line, a single cup shared among 5 people, the warm rim offering a fleeting comfort. A woman pulls an extra woolen shawl from her bag and drapes it over the shivering shoulders of a neighbor. People lean their heads against the brick walls, or against the shoulders of the person sitting next to them, surrendering to an exhausted, fragile sleep. The cellar becomes a cocoon of collective endurance. The smell of damp earth mixes with the scent of lavender soap, old wool, and peppermint drops kept in pockets. It is a space of profound intimacy, forced upon them by the violence of the sky, but transformed by their own quiet decency into a place of sacred refuge. Eventually, the shaking subsides. The low rumble fades away, leaving behind a ringing, heavy silence that feels almost louder than the noise. The dust hangs thick in the air, catching the last, dying light of the lantern. They wait. They do not move until the long, continuous, steady tone of the all-clear siren finally sounds, piercing through the limestone and the brick to reach them in the dark. It is a sound that brings a complicated relief. It means they have survived the night, but it also means they must now walk up the stone steps to face whatever the dawn has revealed. Slowly, stiff limbs are stretched. Blankets are folded. The small cardboard suitcases are picked up once more. The mother kisses the forehead of her sleeping daughter before gently lifting her into her arms. The young woman gives the elderly man's hand one final, grateful squeeze before they part ways. They begin the slow ascent back to the surface. They walk up the stairs, carrying the gray dust on their coats like the ash of a passing storm. But they also carry something else. They carry the secret knowledge of the cellar. They know that when the world was stripped of all its light and all its certainties, they did not turn on each other. They found a way to share the dark. They found a way to whisper lullabies over the sound of breaking stone. Hold on to that thought as the night deepens around you. The world can be a loud and frightening place, and the shadows can sometimes feel overwhelmingly heavy. But remember the quiet courage of the hands held in the dark, and the soft voices speaking of sunflowers while the earth trembles. The human capacity for gentleness is vastly more powerful than the machinery of fear. Rest now, in the quiet safety of your own space, and let the peaceful silence be your lullaby. Step into the pale, breathless light of a morning that smells of pulverized stone, where the world has been entirely rearranged while you slept. There is a strange, suspended moment just after the heavy cellar doors are pushed open, when the people emerge from the deep, protective earth and step back into the world. The long, wailing note of the all-clear siren has long since faded into the distance, leaving behind a silence so vast and profound it feels almost heavy. It is not the quiet of a sleeping city. It is the hushed, stunned reverence of a landscape that has been profoundly, unimaginably altered in the dark. As the survivors slowly climb the stone steps, blinking against the dawn, they are met with a sky the color of old silver. The air is thick with a fine, gray mist, a snow of ash and plaster that drifts down with a gentle, terrifying grace, coating everything in a soft, monochromatic velvet. The streets they walked only yesterday, the familiar corners where they bought their bread or paused to greet a neighbor, are gone. In their place are rolling dunes of brick, shattered timber, and twisted iron. Yet, there is no shouting. There is no loud weeping in these first, surreal hours. The grief and the shock are simply too large for noise. Instead, there is a quiet, dreamlike movement. People wander out into the cool morning air like sleepwalkers, their faces painted gray with the dust, their eyes wide and deeply searching. They are ordinary men and women, wrapped in heavy coats and woolen shawls, stepping into a reality that feels entirely untethered from the day before. Watch as an older woman named Elise slowly navigates the uneven terrain. She is leaning on a sturdy wooden cane, her footsteps careful and deliberate. She is walking toward the place where her apartment building stood for 40 years. When she arrives, she finds that the front wall of the building has been completely sheared away, leaving the interior exposed to the morning light like a tragic, life-sized dollhouse. She can see her living room up on the third floor. The floral wallpaper she and her late husband hung together is fluttering slightly in the breeze. The wooden floorboards end abruptly in midair. But Elise does not look up for long. She lowers her gaze to the mountain of debris at her feet. She begins to search. She is not looking for gold, or money, or grand possessions. She is looking for the small, quiet anchors of her life. She kneels down, ignoring the sharp bite of the broken stone through her skirt, and begins to shift the rubble with gentle, careful hands. She sifts through the pulverized mortar and the splintered wood, her fingers moving with the tender precision of an archaeologist uncovering a sacred artifact. And then, beneath a heavy piece of fallen plaster, she sees a gleam of white. She reaches in and carefully pulls it free. It is a teacup. It is made of delicate, translucent porcelain, painted by hand with tiny, vibrant blue cornflowers. It is the cup she drank from every morning, the cup she held while watching the snow fall in the winters of her youth. Miraculously, impossibly, it is entirely whole. There is not a single chip in its fragile rim. Elise sits back on her heels, holding the cup in both hands. She uses her thumb to gently wipe away the thick layer of gray dust, revealing the bright blue of the painted flowers. A single, silent tear tracks a clean line down her ash-covered cheek. In a world that has just been crushed by unimaginably heavy things, the survival of this delicate piece of porcelain feels like a profound, magnificent victory. She presses the cool rim of the cup against her cheek. It is a tether to her past, a quiet whisper that says the life she lived before this morning was real, and that it still belongs to her. All around her, in the quiet ruins of the street, this same, gentle search is unfolding. People are sifting through the shattered pieces of their lives, finding strange, sorrowful beauty in the things that remain. A father finds the small, wooden rocking horse he carved for his son, its painted mane slightly scorched but its gentle wooden smile intact. He lifts it from the ashes and wipes it clean with the hem of his coat, holding it against his chest as if it were a breathing thing. A young woman finds a tin box of photographs, the faces of her loved ones smiling out from the glossy paper, entirely untouched by the falling stones. She traces the outlines of their faces with a trembling finger, drawing immense, quiet strength from their frozen smiles. These salvaged treasures are not merely objects, they are life rafts. They are the fragile, beautiful evidence of a human history that refuses to be completely erased by the dark. Amidst this solitary searching, the invisible threads of the community begin to weave themselves back together. The true architecture of the city, the architecture of the human heart, has not been broken. Down the street, an elderly man is sitting on a salvaged dining chair in the middle of what used to be a bustling intersection. He is staring blankly ahead, a deep, paralyzing exhaustion settling into his bones. A young boy, no older than 10, approaches him quietly. The boy is carrying a small metal canteen filled with water drawn from a surviving pump. The child does not speak. He simply uncaps the canteen and holds it out. The old man looks at the boy, his hands shaking as he reaches for the metal flask. He takes a slow, careful sip, the cool water washing the ash from his throat. He hands the canteen back, and their eyes meet. In that silent exchange, there is a profound, shared understanding. There is a gentle acknowledgement of their mutual survival. The boy gives the old man a small, brave nod before turning to offer the water to a woman digging a few yards away. These small moments of kindness are the sparks that warm the freezing morning. A neighbor brushes the dust from the shoulders of a stranger. A baker, finding a single, unbroken loaf of bread in the wreckage of his shop, quietly breaks it into pieces and passes it to the people standing nearby. There is no barter, no exchange of coins. There is only the sudden, absolute clarity that in the wake of such immense shadow, all they have left is one another. As the morning stretches toward noon, the gray mist begins to clear, and the pale, wintry sun finally breaks through the clouds. The light casts long, sharp shadows across the broken landscape, illuminating the surreal, heartbreaking poetry of the ruins. In a courtyard hidden behind the remnants of a brick wall, the destruction is nearly absolute. Twisted metal window frames and shattered roof tiles are piled high. But there, in a small, untouched corner of earth, a profound miracle has occurred. It is a rosebush. It was planted years ago, tended with careful hands and quiet patience. The blast wave had stripped it of many of its leaves, and the fine gray dust coats its thorny branches. But at the very end of a single, arching stem, a heavy, velvet red rose has bloomed. It is a startling, vibrant shock of color in a world that has been turned entirely black, white, and gray. People walking past the courtyard pause when they see it. They do not cross the rubble to pick it. They simply stand at the edge of the destruction and look at it. It is so small, so impossibly fragile, yet it stands with a quiet, stubborn defiance against the desolation around it. It is the earth speaking in the only language it knows. It is a silent, beautiful promise that life will insist upon itself, that roots go deeper than the falling stones, and that even in the most broken places, grace can still unfold its petals. A young woman stands looking at the rose, her hand resting on the splintered wood of the courtyard gate. In her pocket is a letter from her husband, sent from the distant, freezing front lines weeks ago. She knows the words by heart. He wrote of the vast, empty snowfields, and of his longing to sit by their small kitchen stove again. She touches the folded paper through the wool of her coat. Looking at the resilient, blooming flower, she feels a sudden, quiet surge of courage. The world around her is shattered, but she is still breathing. She still has his words. She still has her love for him, a flame that the night could not extinguish. She whispers a silent blessing to the flower, and turns back to the monumental task of sweeping the dust from the stones, ready to begin again. As the afternoon slowly bleeds into evening, the rhythm of the city changes. The searching slows. The people begin the quiet, desperate work of making makeshift homes before the dark returns. Tarpaulins are stretched over surviving corners of rooms. Blankets are hung across missing walls to block the creeping chill of the wind. Small, solitary fires are built in the open streets, using shattered floorboards and broken chair legs for fuel. Elise, the woman with the teacup, sits by one of these small fires. She shares the warmth with three neighbors she only vaguely knew before today. They sit close together, the orange light of the flames dancing across their tired, soot-stained faces. The air is cold, but the fire is bright. Elise has salvaged a small tin kettle. She sets it carefully on the embers, melting handfuls of clean snow to boil. When the water is ready, she takes a tiny pinch of dried tea leaves she found in her coat pocket and drops them into the miraculous, unbroken porcelain cup with the blue cornflowers. She holds the warm cup in her hands, letting the steam rise against her face. She takes a slow, careful sip. It tastes of smoke and ash, but it is the most beautiful thing she has ever consumed. It is the taste of survival. She passes the small cup to the woman sitting next to her, sharing the warmth, sharing the fragile normalcy of a simple cup of tea. The sun finally sets, painting the sky in deep, bruised shades of purple and indigo. The stars begin to appear, shining down with an intense, icy clarity, completely unobstructed by the roofs that used to hide them. The city is broken, reduced to dunes of rubble and jagged silhouettes against the night sky. But as you look closely, you can see the tiny, glowing embers of the street fires scattered across the darkness, like a reflection of the stars above. Around these fires sit ordinary, magnificent people. They are bruised, they are exhausted, and they have lost nearly everything they once owned. But they have not lost themselves. They hold on to their salvaged photographs, their carved wooden horses, and their delicate porcelain cups. They hold on to the memory of the red rose blooming in the gray ash. They sit shoulder to shoulder in the quiet dark, listening to the gentle crackle of the flames, wrapped in the profound, sorrowful beauty of simply being alive. They surrender to the deep, heavy pull of sleep, resting their heads against the stones, trusting in their own quiet resilience to face whatever the new dawn may bring. Listen to the heavy, mournful sigh of the steam engine, a slow, metallic breath that wraps the cold platform in a thick, gray fog of farewell. There is a unique and heartbreaking quiet that settles over a train station in the twilight of an era. The grand archways of iron and glass, built decades ago for joyous reunions and holiday journeys, now curve over a landscape of deep, unspoken sorrow. The air beneath the vaulted ceiling is incredibly cold, carrying the sharp, bitter scent of coal smoke, damp wool, and the metallic tang of winter frost. White steam billows from the resting locomotive, swirling slowly around the ankles of the people gathered on the platform, turning them into soft, moving silhouettes in the morning dimness. If you were to walk down this long, stone platform, your footsteps muffled by the swirling mist, you would not see the proud, confident marches of the earlier years. The war has grown old, and it has grown terribly hungry. It has reached past the strong and the able, reaching its heavy hand into the quiet corners of the sitting rooms and the schoolyards. The faces waiting by the train cars today are the faces of the very old and the very young. Look closely through the drifting steam. Standing beneath a flickering, pale yellow lamp is an elderly man named Johannes. His shoulders, once broad and straight, are deeply stooped by the weight of 70 years. He wears a heavy military greatcoat that is entirely too stiff, its thick fabric swallowing his frail frame. His hands, resting on the strap of a canvas rucksack, are gnarled from a lifetime of careful carpentry. He has seen a war before, long ago, in the days of his youth. He knows exactly what lies at the end of the iron tracks, yet his face is a portrait of profound, quiet resignation. Standing directly in front of him is his wife, Martha. They have been married for nearly half a century. They know the geography of each other's hearts better than they know the lines on their own palms. Martha is reaching up, her small, trembling hands adjusting the rough woolen collar of his coat. She smooths the fabric, her fingers lingering just beneath his chin. They do not speak of the front. They do not speak of the terrible, fading hope of the nation. They speak of the small, beautiful, ordinary things that have made up their shared life. The latch on the garden gate is sticking again, Johannes murmurs, his voice a low, gravelly whisper that barely carries over the hiss of the steam. You will need to lift it slightly before you turn the key. I know, Martha answers softly. I will manage it. And you must remember to keep your chest wrapped. The wind in the east is cruel to your lungs. I have the scarf you knitted, he says, touching his chest. It is very warm. Martha steps closer, resting her forehead against his chest for just a moment. She breathes in the scent of him. Beneath the sharp smell of the new uniform and the coal dust of the station, she can still find his true scent, the faint, comforting aroma of sweet pipe tobacco, cedar shavings, and the peppermint drops he always keeps in his pocket. She closes her eyes, memorizing this scent, drawing it deep into her memory so that she might wrap herself in it on the long, lonely nights to come. She does not cry. She summons a heroic, ancient courage, building a dam against her tears, because she refuses to let him carry the heavy burden of her weeping on his journey. She looks up, offers him a small, incredibly brave smile, and squeezes his hand. Further down the platform, the tragedy shifts its shape, settling onto the narrow shoulders of a child. A young boy named Lucas is standing near the open door of a passenger car. He is perhaps 15, but his face is still entirely soft, untouched by the razor, holding the lingering roundness of boyhood. The helmet hanging from his belt is comically large. His boots are stiff, threatening to blister his heels with the first mile of marching. He is trying desperately to stand at attention, to look like the hardened soldier the radio broadcasts demand him to be. He thrusts his chin out, his eyes wide and fixed on the gray sky above the glass canopy. His mother stands beside him. She is holding his bare hands in hers, rubbing them to keep the chill away. She looks at him, and she does not see a soldier. She sees the toddler who used to hide beneath the kitchen table. She sees the little boy who came home with scraped knees and pockets full of smooth river stones. The realization that she cannot protect him from the vast, dark world waiting beyond the city limits is an agony so deep it has no voice. She reaches into the pocket of her own worn coat and pulls out a small, folded square of paper. It is a letter she wrote by the light of a single candle the night before. Put this in your breast pocket, she whispers, her voice trembling like a fragile leaf in the wind. Do not open it until you are on the train. Promise me, Lucas. Lucas nods, taking the letter. He slides it beneath the heavy gray wool, resting it right against his heart. I packed an extra pair of socks, she continues, talking quickly, trying to fill the terrifying silence of the moment. And there is a piece of hard chocolate wrapped in wax paper at the bottom of your bag. Save it for a day when you are very tired. Just a small piece at a time. "I will, Mama," he says, his voice suddenly cracking, betraying the frightened child hiding beneath the uniform. She cannot stop herself. She steps forward and wraps her arms tightly around him, burying her face in the crook of his neck. She holds him with a fierce, desperate strength, as if by holding on tight enough, she might anchor him to the platform forever. Lucas drops his rigid posture. For just a moment, he is a boy again, leaning into his mother's embrace, breathing in the familiar, soothing scent of her lavender soap and flour-dusted apron. And then, the sharp, piercing shriek of the conductor's whistle cuts through the fog. It is a terrible, final sound. It is the sound of time running out. A sudden, chaotic wave of movement washes over the platform. The heavy train doors are pulled open. Orders are shouted down the line. The old men and the young boys begin to climb the steep iron steps, disappearing into the dark, cavernous bellies of the railcars. The people left on the platform surge forward, stepping right to the very edge of the yellow safety line. The windows of the train are pulled down where possible, but the winter air is so bitter that many remain closed. This is the moment of the glass barrier. Lucas finds a window seat. He presses his face against the cold, thick pane. His breath instantly fogs the glass, creating a small circle of white. He wipes it away frantically with the sleeve of his coat, desperate not to lose sight of his mother for even a second. She is standing on the platform, right outside his window. She raises her hand, placing her palm flat against the outside of the cold glass. Inside, Lucas mirrors her movement. He raises his own hand and presses it against the inside of the pane, fitting his fingers perfectly over the silhouette of hers. They are only an inch apart, separated by a fragile sheet of glass, yet the distance between them is already becoming an ocean. Further down, Martha is doing the same. Johannes is standing in the corridor, looking down at her through a frosted window. He offers her a slow, gentle nod. It is a silent vow. He is telling her he will try to come back to the garden gate. She nods back, her hand resting against the glass, feeling the deep, rhythmic vibration of the engine building beneath her feet. The massive iron wheels screech in protest. A great, hissing cloud of steam erupts from beneath the train, obscuring the platform in a sudden, blinding white fog. The train slowly begins to move. The hands pressed against the glass slide away. The mothers, the wives, and the sisters begin to walk alongside the moving train. They walk at first, their eyes locked onto the faces behind the windows. As the train picks up speed, they begin to jog. The heavy rhythm of the pistons accelerates, a steady, unyielding heartbeat of iron. The women run down the stone platform, their scarves flying behind them, reaching out toward the blurring windows until they run out of pavement. They stop at the very end of the platform, standing in the cold, swirling mist. They watch the dark, rectangular cars shrink into the distance, slipping down the tracks and into the vast, gray unknown of the winter morning. The rhythmic clack-clack of the wheels grows fainter and fainter, until it is entirely swallowed by the silence of the falling snow. The platform is empty now of those who departed, but it is heavy with the ghosts of their presence. The air is still charged with the echoes of whispered promises and the lingering scents of tobacco and lavender. Martha turns away from the tracks. She wraps her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She feels the immense, crushing weight of the silence, but she also feels the enduring, quiet resilience that has carried her through so much. She will go home. She will wind the clock. She will feed the cat. She will wait. Lucas's mother walks back toward the station exit, her hands empty, her heart a heavy stone. But as she walks, she thinks of the folded piece of paper resting over her son's heart. In the letter, she did not write of fear. She wrote of the day he was born, of how the sun came through the window and painted the room in gold. She wrote that he is deeply, endlessly loved, and that her love will follow him like a shield, no matter how far he travels into the dark. These are the unseen heroics of the platform. The tears that were swallowed so the departing could leave with a smile. The hands that let go when every instinct screamed to hold on. The quiet, dignified turn back toward a lonely house to keep the hearth fires burning. As the fog rolls back over the empty tracks, leaving only the cold iron rails gleaming in the dim light, the station settles into a deep, meditative hush. The farewells have been spoken. The journey has begun. If you are lying in the quiet dark, listening to the gentle rhythm of the night, think of the profound, beautiful strength of those who stay behind. The world can fracture, and the trains can carry the ones we love into the distance, but the unseen threads of the human heart are stronger than steel, and longer than any rail line ever laid. Rest now. Let the distant, rhythmic hum of the world lull you into peace, knowing that love travels through the dark, crossing every border, and finding its way home. Watch the snow falling softly over the dark pine trees, burying the roads and turning the world into a vast, silent ocean of white. There is a profound, heavy stillness that descends upon the earth when the snow falls so thickly. It absorbs the sounds of the world, wrapping the forests and the fields in a thick, insulating blanket. The air is so cold it aches to breathe, carrying the sharp, pure scent of frost and frozen pine needles. But beneath this pristine, quiet surface, a slow, incredibly weary river of humanity is moving. It is the deepest part of the winter, and the shadows that have been gathering on the horizon have finally grown too large to ignore. The distant rumble of the approaching front, a sound that has haunted the edges of sleep for months, has become a steady, unavoidable drumming. And so, the doors of the ancestral homes are opening one last time. Families are stepping out into the freezing wind, leaving behind the warmth of their hearths to walk into the vast, unforgiving white. Imagine a farmhouse sitting at the edge of a snow-swept field. Inside, a woman named Anna stands in the center of her kitchen. The stove is already cold. The small, familiar sounds of her home, the ticking of the clock, the creak of the floorboards, seem unnaturally loud in the empty rooms. She is faced with an impossible, heartbreaking task. She must distill the entire history of her family's life into what can fit onto a single, wooden sled. She looks at the heavy oak dining table where generations have broken bread. She touches the painted porcelain plates displayed on the dresser. She traces the intricate carving on the wooden cradle in the corner. She cannot take any of it. Instead, she takes the heaviest woolen blankets. She takes a sack of flour, a small jar of preserved cherries, and a pair of sturdy, fur-lined boots that once belonged to her father. She takes a single, silver locket holding a miniature portrait of her husband, who is somewhere far away in the dark. She moves with a quiet, deliberate efficiency, suppressing the rising tide of grief. If she stops to weep for the heavy wooden table, she knows she will not find the strength to leave. She buttons her two young children into layers of thick wool, wrapping coarse scarves around their necks until only their bright, confused eyes are visible. She lifts them onto the small wooden sled, tucking the blankets tightly around their small legs. Then comes the hardest moment of all. Anna steps out onto the porch. She pulls the heavy wooden door shut. She turns the iron key in the lock, hearing the final, metallic click echo in the freezing air. She does not look back. To look back is to invite a sorrow too heavy to carry. She takes the thick rope of the sled in her mittened hands, leans her weight forward, and begins to walk. The road is not a road anymore. It is a long, winding scar of trampled snow, stretching out toward the setting sun. Anna joins a silent, slow-moving column of shadows. There are thousands of them, moving at the pace of the weakest among them. Old men leaning heavily on walking sticks. Grandmothers wrapped in layers of mismatched shawls. Mothers pulling sleds, carrying infants pressed tightly against their chests to share the warmth of their own beating hearts. There is no panic here. The panic has been frozen solid by the sheer, overwhelming effort of putting one foot in front of the other. The only sound is the rhythmic, hypnotic crunch of leather boots on the packed snow, the soft slicing of the wooden runners, and the ragged, shallow breathing of exhausted lungs. It is a deeply physical journey. The wind whips across the open plains, biting at any exposed skin, stealing the heat from the body with a cruel, indifferent efficiency. Anna feels the cold seeping through the soles of her boots, creeping up her calves. Her shoulders ache with a dull, burning fire from the weight of the sled. But she does not stop. The fierce, primal instinct to protect her children pushes her forward, step by agonizing step. She is their entire world now. She is their warmth, their safety, and their compass. As the hours drag on, the children on the sled begin to shiver. The little boy, his eyelashes dusted with tiny white crystals of frost, looks up at her. "Mama," he whispers, his voice trembling. "Are we almost there?" Anna does not know where there is. She only knows they must keep moving west, away from the thunder. But she cannot tell him that. She swallows the dry lump of fear in her throat and summons a voice of absolute, soothing calm. "Yes, my darling," she murmurs, walking backward for a moment to shield his face from the wind. "We are going to a place where the stoves are always lit. We are going to find a room with a big feather bed, and we will have hot milk with honey." "With a lot of honey?" the little girl asks, her voice muffled by the thick scarf. "So much honey," Anna promises, forcing a gentle smile. "And we will sit by the fire until our toes are perfectly warm. But you must be brave for me just a little longer. You must keep your eyes open and watch the snow for me." She turns back around, gripping the rope tighter. She tells them a story over her shoulder, a gentle fairy tale about a brave little bear walking through a winter forest. Her words become a rhythmic chant, matching the pace of her boots. The sound of her voice is a lifeline, a magical, invisible thread pulling her children through the freezing wasteland. In this column of profound exhaustion, the smallest gestures of humanity shine with a brilliant, heartbreaking light. Walking beside Anna is an elderly man pulling a small cart. His face is gray with fatigue, his breath coming in shallow, wheezing gasps. Suddenly, the wooden wheel of his cart catches on a deep rut in the ice. He stumbles, falling to his knees in the snow. The people behind him do not shout or push. Anna stops her sled. She walks over to the old man, reaching down with her thick mittens to gently grasp his arm. Without a word, a younger woman from the other side also steps forward. Together, they pull the old man back to his feet. They brush the snow from his knees. The younger woman reaches into her deep pocket and pulls out a small, hard piece of sugar root. She presses it into the old man's trembling hand. He looks at them, his eyes watering from the cold and from a gratitude so deep it cannot be spoken. He nods, placing the sugar root on his tongue, drawing on its tiny burst of energy. Anna returns to her sled, and the silent, slow march continues. It is a shared, unspoken vow among strangers: we will not leave each other to the snow. We will share the burden of this unimaginable weight. As the afternoon wears on, the pale winter sun begins to dip below the horizon. The sky bleeds from a cold, blinding white into bruised shades of violet and indigo. The temperature plummets, a sudden, terrifying drop that turns the breath into thick clouds of white steam. Finding shelter before the true darkness falls is a matter of life and death. The column begins to fragment, families breaking off to seek refuge in abandoned barns, ruined churches, or beneath the thickest groves of pine trees. Anna spots a small, wooden barn sitting in a slight depression near the edge of a forest. She pulls the sled off the road, her legs feeling like lead as she wades through the deep, unbroken drifts. She pushes open the heavy wooden door. The interior is pitch black, but it blocks the wind. It is an immediate, profound relief. The air inside smells of dry dust, old leather, and the sweet, earthy scent of ancient hay. She pulls the sled inside and closes the door, shutting out the howling of the night. Her hands are completely numb, moving clumsily as she unbundles the children. She lifts them from the sled and sets them down in a large pile of dry hay in the corner. She does not light a fire. It is too dangerous to draw attention to their hiding place. Instead, she creates a nest. She pulls the heaviest woolen blankets from the sled and drapes them over the hay. She brings the children close together, wrapping them tightly in the quilts, pressing her own body against theirs to share every ounce of her remaining warmth. She opens the small jar of preserved cherries. It is a taste of the summer they left behind. She gives each child 2 sweet, dark cherries, letting the syrup soothe their dry throats. It is a feast in the dark. Now it is time to sleep, Anna whispers, stroking their hair in the pitch black. We are safe here. The walls are strong, and the wind cannot find us. The children, exhausted beyond measure, do not argue. They close their eyes, their breathing slowing, falling into the deep, heavy slumber of the innocent. Anna does not sleep. She lies awake in the dark, her arm thrown protectively over her children. She listens to the wind rattling the wooden boards of the barn. She listens to the soft, rhythmic breathing of her son and daughter. In the quiet of the night, the emotional toll of the day finally crashes over her. She thinks of the heavy oak table. She thinks of the kitchen she will never see again. She thinks of the footprints they left in the snow, slowly being filled in by the falling flakes, erasing the path back to their old lives. The tears finally come, silent and hot, slipping down her cheeks and soaking into the rough wool of the blanket. But as she holds her children in the dark, the sorrow slowly begins to harden into a quiet, beautiful resolve. She has lost her home, but she has not lost them. She has pulled them through the frozen wasteland. She has found them a safe harbor in the storm. She is their mother, and as long as she draws breath, she will keep them warm. She looks up at a small crack in the roof of the barn. Through the splintered wood, she can see a single, tiny star shining with an icy, brilliant clarity against the black sky. It is a reminder that even in the longest, coldest nights, the light persists. The winter is cruel, and the journey is long, but the human heart is a furnace that refuses to be extinguished. It burns with a quiet, stubborn love that is stronger than the frost. As the wind sings its mournful song outside the wooden walls, let the image of that small, protected nest bring you peace. Let the enduring strength of the mother in the dark wrap around you like a heavy, warm blanket. The world may be covered in deep, drifting snow, but the quiet resilience of the human spirit leaves a footprint that no storm can ever truly wash away. Rest your eyes, surrender to the gentle quiet of the night, and sleep. Breathe in the scent of damp earth and ancient pine, where the world has suddenly grown so quiet you can hear the beating of your own exhausted heart. There is a profound, almost sacred stillness that lives deep within the old forests, a heavy, fragrant silence woven from the shadows of towering trees and the soft, forgiving bed of fallen leaves. For generations, these woods were the setting of childhood fairy tales, a place for Sunday walks, for gathering wild mushrooms, and for finding the first delicate snowdrops of spring. But now, in the twilight of a fading era, the forest has become something else entirely. It has become a sanctuary of last resort. It has become a vast, green waiting room between the world that is burning out and the new world that has not yet arrived. Imagine standing in the dappled light of a thick birch grove. The air is cool and smells sharply of crushed fern and wet stone. If you look closely through the tangled underbrush, past the thick trunks of the oaks and the drooping branches of the weeping willows, you will see them. They are perfectly still, blending into the muted colors of the woodland floor. These are the ordinary families, the mothers, the grandfathers, the quiet children, who have walked away from their homes, carrying only what their weary arms could hold, fleeing the unimaginable storm that is sweeping across the land. They have run until there is nowhere left to run. And now, they wait. This is the liminal space. It is a terrifying, breathtaking pause. The great, mechanical roar of the war is no longer a distant rumor, it is a physical vibration in the earth, a low, heavy rumble that occasionally shakes the dust from the pine needles. But here, beneath the heavy canopy of leaves, that human madness feels strangely distant. The forest does not know about front lines or falling regimes. The forest only knows the slow turning of the seasons, the uncurling of the fern, and the steady, indifferent march of the sun across the sky. In a small hollow formed by the uprooted base of an ancient, fallen cedar tree, a family is hiding. They have woven loose branches and green boughs around the opening to conceal themselves from the path. Inside this fragrant, earthen cave, a young mother named Helene sits with her arms wrapped entirely around her sleeping son. Her clothes are stained with the mud of a 3-day journey. Her shoes are worn thin. Every muscle in her body is singing with a deep, bruised exhaustion, a weariness so complete it feels as though it has seeped into the marrow of her bones. Yet, she does not sleep. Her eyes, wide and dark, track the slight movements of the shadows outside their hiding place. She is holding her breath, listening. To live in the woods in these final days is to become a creature of pure hearing. Every snapping twig, every sudden rustle of dry leaves, sends a jolt of pure ice through the veins. Is it a deer stepping through the brambles, or is it the heavy, leather boot of a soldier? Is that the wind rushing through the upper branches, or is it the sound of a convoy moving down the hidden dirt road? Helene listens to the forest, her heart hammering a frantic, bird-like rhythm against her ribs. But as the moments stretch into hours, she begins to notice the profound indifference of the natural world around her. Just inches from her muddy shoe, a small green beetle is painstakingly climbing over a piece of bark. High above, hidden in the leaves, a wood thrush begins to sing its clear, liquid song. There is a strange, overwhelming comfort in this indifference. The world of men is tearing itself apart, but the beetle still climbs, and the bird still sings. The earth is still holding them. Helene lets out a long, slow breath, a breath she feels she has been holding for years. She rests her cheek against the top of her son's head, inhaling the scent of his hair, which smells of the wind and the wood smoke of their last campfire. Next to them in the hollow sits an older man, a retired watchmaker named Elias. He has lived in the nearby valley his entire life. He knows these woods. He knows which streams run clear and which berries are safe to eat. In the chaotic flight from the town, he became the quiet shepherd of this small group of neighbors. Elias is sitting with his back against the damp earth, his hands resting in his lap. His hands are trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the immense physical toll of the journey. He looks at Helene and offers a slow, reassuring nod. It is a gesture of profound, everyday heroism. He has no weapons. He has no power to stop the advancing armies. But he has his calm. He has his gentle presence. He is offering himself as an anchor in a sea of terrifying uncertainty. Slowly, carefully, Elias reaches into the deep pocket of his woolen coat. He pulls out a small, metal tin. He pries the lid open with his thumb. Inside are a few precious, hoarded treasures, a stub of a pencil, a tightly folded map, and 3 small, hard candies. He leans forward, his movements agonizingly slow so as not to rustle the leaves, and taps Helene lightly on the knee. He holds out the tin. Helene looks at the candy, then up at the old man's kind, deeply lined face. Tears well in her eyes, hot and sudden. It is such a small thing, a piece of boiled sugar, but in the center of this terrifying, hidden world, it is an act of monumental grace. She reaches out with trembling fingers and takes one, whispering a wordless breath of gratitude. She does not eat it herself. She slips it carefully into the pocket of her sleeping son's coat, a tiny, sweet surprise for when he wakes to a world that is frightening and strange. As the afternoon deepens, the light filtering through the trees changes from a bright, dappled gold to a bruised, somber purple. The shadows stretch out, long and thin, like fingers reaching across the forest floor. The temperature begins to drop, bringing a sharp, biting chill that cuts through the damp wool of their coats. This is the hardest part of the waiting. The night brings a deeper cover, but it also brings a blinding dark, amplifying every sound until the imagination conjures terrors from the simple shifting of the wind. A few yards away, hidden behind a thick thicket of blackberry bushes, a young woman named Clara is sitting alone. She has separated slightly from the main group to find a moment of absolute privacy. She is leaning her head back against the smooth, white bark of a birch tree, her eyes closed. In her hands, pressed tightly against her chest, is a letter. The paper is soft and worn at the creases, the ink slightly faded. It is from her older sister, who managed to cross a border long before the world entirely closed its doors. Clara does not need to read the words, they are permanently etched into her mind. I am waiting for you. The house has a blue door, and there is a bakery at the end of the street. Just keep walking until you find the blue door. In the suffocating fear of the forest, surrounded by the unknown, that blue door is Clara's entire universe. It is her compass point. She imagines it vividly in the dark. She imagines the feel of the brass handle, the smell of the baking bread, the sound of her sister's voice. She draws the letter to her lips and kisses the paper, a silent, desperate prayer sent out into the gathering gloom. She is gathering her courage, pulling it from the fragile paper, preparing herself for the moment when they must leave the safety of the trees and step out into whatever world remains. When the darkness finally settles over the woods, it is absolute. The canopy above is so thick that not even the stars can pierce the gloom. The forest becomes an ocean of black. In the hollow beneath the cedar roots, Helene, her son, and Elias pull closer together. They must share their body heat to survive the chill of the damp earth. They huddle into a single, breathing knot of humanity. There are no campfires tonight. A fire would be a beacon, a dangerous invitation to the violence sweeping the roads. They must endure the cold and the dark with only the warmth of their own fragile bodies. Elias closes his eyes and begins to whisper. His voice is so soft it is barely indistinguishable from the rustle of the leaves. He is reciting an old, familiar song, a poem of green pastures and still waters. He is not preaching, he is simply using the rhythmic, beautiful words as a shield against the silence. Helene listens to the low, steady cadence of his voice. She closes her eyes and matches her breathing to his words. She feels the warm, steady rise and fall of her son's chest against her own. She is terrified, yes. The world beyond the tree line is entirely unknown. Tomorrow may bring salvation, or it may bring ruin. But tonight, right now, in this small, hidden pocket of the earth, they are breathing. They are together. The forest keeps its ancient watch over them. The heavy branches sway gently in the night wind, a slow, hypnotic dance. The earth, cool and firm, holds them in its quiet embrace. It is a terrifying, beautiful liminal space, a pause in the breath of history. They surrender, finally, to the overwhelming weight of their exhaustion. The adrenaline that carried them through the long miles fades, leaving behind a heavy, narcotic need for sleep. Helene's head nods, resting against Elias's shoulder. The old watchmaker leans his head back against the dirt, his whispered prayer fading into a soft, steady breathing. Even Clara, clutching her letter behind the blackberry bushes, lets the darkness pull her under, dreaming of a blue door at the end of a quiet street. Let the stillness of the deep woods wash over you. The world outside may be rushing toward an unknown dawn, but here, in the quiet dark, there is only the gentle rhythm of breath, the soft earth, and the enduring, quiet courage of those who wait in the shadows. Close your eyes. Let the heavy, peaceful silence of the forest wrap around you, and sleep. Listen to the heavy, ringing emptiness of a sky that has finally, impossibly, forgotten how to thunder. There is a silence that follows a great storm, a profound and breathless hush when the wind simply drops, and the world stands completely still to survey what is left behind. This was not the peaceful quiet of a Sunday morning, nor the restful calm of a winter evening. It was a deafening, surreal absence of noise. For years, the air had been thick with the sounds of marching boots, the wail of sirens, the heavy drone of engines in the dark, and the sharp, terrifying crack of a breaking world. And then, quite suddenly, the massive, grinding gears of history simply stopped turning. The guns went quiet. The sky cleared. And a bewildered, deeply bruised humanity cautiously opened its eyes to a landscape that was entirely unrecognizable. This was year zero. It was a time when the calendar seemed to wipe itself clean, leaving ordinary people standing in the gray dust, holding the fragile, overwhelmingly heavy truth that they were, against all odds, still alive. Imagine a man named Elias slowly pushing open the heavy iron door of a basement shelter. The hinges groan, a loud, scraping sound that seems to echo for miles in the new quiet. He steps up onto the street, his hands resting on the rough, broken brick of the stairwell. He squints against the pale, unfiltered sunlight. He stands there, his breath catching in his throat, waiting for a sound that does not come. He waits for the shout of an air raid warden, or the distant, rhythmic thud of artillery. But there is only the wind, blowing softly through the jagged ruins, lifting small swirls of plaster dust into the air like ghosts. Elias closes his eyes and lets out a long, shuddering breath. The silence presses against his eardrums. It is so vast, so complete, that he can hear the beat of his own heart, a steady, quiet drum proving his existence. He is a man standing at the very edge of the world, feeling the strange, sorrowful relief of merely drawing breath. Out in these fractured streets, the survivors begin to wander. They are a dazed, slow-moving tide of ordinary people, their clothes dusted with the ubiquitous gray ash of the city. They move without a destination, for the landmarks that once guided their lives have been erased. Watch a woman named Clara as she walks down what used to be a wide, bustling avenue. She carries a small, battered leather suitcase, her knuckles white around the handle. She is looking for the street where she grew up, but the street signs have vanished, buried beneath mountains of shattered limestone and twisted iron. She navigates entirely by memory, by the slope of a hill or the curve of the river in the distance. The world around her is a surreal painting. She passes the facade of a grand apartment building, completely sheared away, exposing the interior like a tragic theater set. On the third floor, suspended in mid-air, a porcelain bathtub clings to a single piece of pipe. Below it, on the ground, lies a crystal chandelier, its prisms catching the sunlight and casting tiny, beautiful rainbows onto the crushed brick. Clara does not weep. The tears have long since dried up, replaced by a deep, numbing shock. She walks until she finds a familiar wrought iron gate, bent and rusted, standing perfectly upright in the middle of a flattened lot. It was the gate to her grandmother's garden. Clara stops. She reaches out and rests her hand on the cold iron. She traces the shape of a forged iron leaf with her thumb. It is a tiny, physical connection to a past that feels like a dream. She leans her forehead against the gate and stands in the quiet sun, letting the immense, heavy emptiness of the fractured world wash over her. In this landscape of ruin, the simplest human interactions take on a profound, almost sacred weight. The masks of suspicion and fear, worn for so many years, begin to slowly, hesitantly slip away. Later that afternoon, Clara sits on a piece of fallen masonry near a communal water pump. She is exhausted, her feet aching in shoes that have walked too many miles. A few yards away sits a young soldier. He is not wearing the uniform of her country. He is part of the great, sweeping tide that arrived with the end of the war. For years, Clara was taught to fear the very idea of this boy. She was told he was a monster from the east, a shadow that brought only ruin. But as she looks at him now, sitting in the dust, she sees only a child. His uniform is too large for his thin shoulders. His face is smudged with dirt, and his eyes carry the exact same hollow, thousand-mile stare that she sees in the mirror. He is resting his head in his hands, looking at a small, torn photograph. He looks up and catches Clara watching him. The air between them freezes for a fraction of a second, the old instincts of war and division flickering to life. But the guns are silent. The silence demands something new. The young soldier slowly reaches into his canvas pack. He pulls out a small, hard biscuit. He breaks it in half with dirty fingers. He does not say a word, for they share no language, but he extends his hand, offering the piece of biscuit to Clara. Clara looks at the rough, dry bread. It is a peace offering, a bridge built over a chasm of unimaginable sorrow. She stands up, walks the few steps across the broken stones, and takes the biscuit from his hand. She offers him a small, deeply tired smile. He nods in return, his shoulders dropping a fraction of an inch. They sit on the stones, a few feet apart, chewing the dry bread in silence. It is an act of breathtaking, everyday heroism. In a world that spent a decade trying to tear humanity apart, this silent sharing of a meal in the dust is a profound rebellion. It is the quiet recognition that beneath the uniforms and the borders, they are just two exhausted souls sitting in the ruins of the world, hungry, far from home, and desperate for a moment of peace. As the days turn into weeks in this year's zero, the survivors begin to carve out a fragile existence in the quiet. They are a society of scavengers and builders, finding life in the spaces between the wreckage. In the corner of a roofless post office, a mother named Mathilde sits on a wooden crate, balancing a salvaged piece of paper on her knee. She holds a stub of a pencil, wetting the lead with her tongue before pressing it to the page. She is writing a letter to her husband, who was lost to the swirling chaos of the final months. She does not know if he is alive. She does not know where to send the letter. But the act of writing is a tether to her own sanity. My dearest, she writes, her handwriting large and careful. The silence here is so loud it wakes me in the night. We are still here. The house is gone, but I found the heavy iron skillet in the rubble, and the children are safe. The apple tree in the courtyard was burned, but this morning I saw a tiny green shoot pushing through the ash at its roots. She pauses, looking up at the open sky where the ceiling used to be. A flock of pigeons sweeps overhead, their wings making a soft, rushing sound in the quiet air. We are simply waiting, she continues. We sweep the dust, we fetch the water, and we wait. Do not worry for us. The fear has finally gone away. There is only a great emptiness now, but it is an emptiness where we can finally breathe. I will keep writing until you find us. I love you. She folds the paper and tucks it into the pocket of her dress, close to her heart. It is a paper phantom sent into the void, a testament to a quiet, stubborn resilience that refuses to surrender to the void. She stands up, smoothing her apron, and goes back out into the sun to find firewood for the evening meal. When the evening finally comes, it brings a strange, forgotten beauty. For the first time in years, there is no need to pull the heavy, suffocating blackout curtains across the windows. There are no windows left to cover. But more importantly, there is nothing left in the sky to hide from. The city, devoid of electric lights, is plunged into a deep, velvet darkness. But it is not the terrifying dark of the war years. It is a soft, natural night. Small, flickering campfires begin to bloom among the ruins, dotting the landscape like fallen stars. Families gather around these tiny flames, boiling water, sharing meager rations, and speaking in low, hushed voices. They whisper not out of fear of the secret police, but because the world feels so fragile they are afraid a loud voice might shatter it entirely. Elias sits by one of these fires, wrapping a woolen blanket around his shoulders. He looks up at the sky. Without the glare of the city, the stars are incredibly bright, a vast, sweeping river of silver light stretching from horizon to horizon. They look exactly as they did before the madness began. They look completely untouched by the sorrow of the earth. He breathes in the cool night air, smelling the wood smoke and the damp, settling dust. The heavy emptiness of the fractured world is still there, a profound ache in the chest for all that has been lost. The grief will take lifetimes to process. The rebuilding will take generations. But tonight, in the quiet glow of the embers, there is a gentle, melancholic relief. The sirens will not sound. The ground will not shake. The storm has passed, leaving them washed up on the shores of a strange new time. Elias closes his eyes and listens to the soft murmur of his neighbors, the crackle of the dry wood, and the profound, beautiful silence that holds it all together. He lets his head drop back, surrendering to a deep, restorative sleep, resting in the quiet grace of simply being alive to see the dawn of year zero. Let the stillness of that night wrap around you now. Let the silence be a comfort, a promise that all storms eventually run out of rain, and that peace, no matter how bruised, will always return to the earth. Sleep now, and breathe in the quiet. Trace the rim of an empty porcelain cup in the quiet dusk, and feel the profound, heavy silence of a chair that will never be pulled out again. There is a season that comes after the great storms of history, a season that is not marked on any calendar. It is the time when the physical dust has finally settled upon the broken cobblestones, when the skies are clear of smoke, and the immediate, frantic scramble for mere survival begins to slowly, gently ease. To the outside world, it might look like the beginning of peace. But inside the quiet rooms and the unlit hallways of the homes that remain, there is a different landscape entirely. It is a vast, unseen country of memory, and its gravity is immense. Without the deafening noise of the war to drown it out, the quiet suddenly becomes unimaginably loud. It is in this profound stillness that the heart finally has the space to measure exactly what has been lost. Imagine a small, perfectly tidy kitchen just as the sun begins to sink below the horizon, painting the plaster walls in bruised shades of violet and gray. A woman named Greta is standing by the stove, stirring a small pot of clear broth. The rhythmic, soothing scrape of the wooden spoon against the metal is the only sound in the room, save for the steady, unbothered ticking of the clock on the mantel. Greta moves with the gentle, practiced efficiency of a lifetime of evenings. She walks to the wooden cupboard and opens the door. Without thinking, guided by a muscular memory forged over 40 years of marriage, her hands reach out and take down 2 shallow bowls. She carries them to the table and sets them down. She places a folded linen napkin beside each one, and a silver spoon. She turns back to the stove, and then, she stops. The realization does not strike her like a physical blow. It arrives like a slow, cold mist seeping under the door. She looks at the second bowl. The man who used to sit in that chair, the man who used to hum a tuneless, happy melody while he waited for his supper, is gone. He was swallowed by the vast, gray distances of the winter front, leaving behind only a folded telegram and the lingering, faint scent of his pipe tobacco in the hallway closet. Greta does not cry out. She does not sweep the bowl from the table in a fit of dramatic sorrow. She simply stands there, her hands resting on the back of the empty wooden chair. She closes her eyes and breathes in the quiet. Slowly, she picks up the second bowl, the second napkin, and the second spoon. She carries them back to the cupboard and gently closes the door. It is a tiny, devastating act of acceptance. This is the unspoken weight of memory. It is carried in these phantom habits, in the sudden, heartbreaking instinct to turn and share a joke with a shadow, or the urge to save the largest piece of bread for someone who will never come home to eat it. It is a heavy, invisible coat worn over the shoulders, an ache so constant it simply becomes a part of the architecture of the soul. Across the city, in a room bathed in the silver light of the moon, an old man named Arthur sits at a small wooden writing desk. The world outside his window is asleep, but Arthur is keeping a quiet vigil. Resting on the desk before him is a small, ornate wooden box. It is the most valuable thing he owns. He unlatches the small brass clasp and opens the lid. Inside is a stack of letters, tied with a piece of faded blue ribbon. The envelopes are soft and worn from being touched 1,000 times. They are the letters his son wrote from the war. But beneath them lies another stack of envelopes. These are the ones Arthur wrote in return. They bear his careful, elegant handwriting, detailing the small, beautiful mundanities of home, the first frost on the windowpane, the way the neighborhood cat finally caught a mouse, the hope that the war would end before the spring. Across the front of these envelopes, stamped in harsh, red ink, is a single, terrible word indicating that the recipient could not be found. Undeliverable. Arthur unties the ribbon and slides out the very last letter his son ever sent. He reads the words in the moonlight. He knows them by heart, every loop of the ink, every slight smudge where the boy's hand must have rested. He reads between the lines, feeling the ghost of his son's presence filling the small, dark room. Then, Arthur takes a fresh, blank sheet of paper. He unscrews the cap of his fountain pen. He begins to write. My dearest boy, he writes into the silent night. The linden trees in the square are blooming again. They smell so sweet in the evenings. I saw a boy today who looked so much like you from behind, the same way you used to walk with your hands deep in your pockets. For a moment, my heart stopped. Arthur knows there is no mailbox in the world that can carry this letter. He knows there is no address to write on the envelope. But he writes anyway. He writes because the love he holds for his son has nowhere else to go. The act of forming the letters on the page is a bridge built of ink and longing, a way to keep the conversation going across the great, dark divide. He is keeping the ghost warm. When he finishes, he folds the paper gently, places it at the bottom of the wooden box, and closes the lid, locking the sorrow safely away until tomorrow night. Yet, not all the ghosts in this quiet landscape are the ones who were loved and lost to the battlefields. Some of the heaviest memories are forged from the complex, suffocating weight of guilt. Think of the long, dim hallway of an apartment building where the floorboards creak underfoot. An older woman named Ilsa walks down this hall every morning with a broom, sweeping the dust. At the very end of the corridor is a door that has remained locked for years. It is the door to the apartment where a family of Jewish neighbors once lived. A mother, a father, and a little girl with bright ribbons in her hair who used to practice the piano every Sunday afternoon. Ilsa remembers the night they were taken away. She remembers the heavy boots on the stairs, the sharp commands, the muffled crying. She remembers standing behind her own locked door, trembling in the dark, her hand covering her own mouth to keep from making a sound. She remembers doing nothing. The war is over now, and the regime that took them has fallen to dust. But the empty door remains. Ilsa stops sweeping when she reaches it. She leans on her broom and looks at the tarnished brass doorknob. She cannot change the past. She cannot rewind the clock and find the unimaginable courage it would have taken to open her door that night. The guilt is a stone lodged deep in her throat, a sorrow that cannot be mended by sweeping or by time. It is the quiet, terrifying realization of her own fragility, of the terrible compromises made in the name of surviving a nightmare. Ilsa reaches into the pocket of her apron. She pulls out a small, perfectly white pebble she found in the courtyard. With a trembling hand, she places the stone gently on the wooden threshold of the locked door. It is an ancient gesture of remembrance, a tiny, private apology whispered to the universe. It is her way of saying, I have not forgotten you. I hear the silence where your piano used to play. I carry the weight of my own silence, and I am so deeply sorry. She bows her head for a long moment, honoring the ghosts of the hallway, before turning back to the necessary, exhausting work of living. This is the emotional landscape of the aftermath. It is a world where the people are walking softly, navigating around the invisible craters left by those who simply disappeared. It is a time of profound, deeply private mourning. The grief is not loud. It is not a wailing in the streets. It is a quiet, persistent companion, sitting in the corner of every room, walking a few paces behind on every street. When the sun finally sets and the evening gives way to the deep, velvet night, the distractions of the day fade away. The sweeping is done, the meager meals have been eaten, and the doors are locked. In the absolute quiet of the dark, the memories become their most vivid, pressing closely against the edges of the bed. This is when the quiet tears are shed. In thousands of dark rooms, faces are pressed softly into pillows. The tears come not in violent, heaving sobs, but in a slow, steady, silent stream. They are the tears of exhaustion. They are the tears of the mother who cannot stop imagining the cold fields where her son lies. They are the tears of the wife tracing the cold, empty space on the mattress beside her. They are the tears of the survivor, weeping simply because they are still breathing when so many others are not. There is a profound, cleansing beauty in these quiet tears. They are the physical manifestation of love that has endured the darkest of storms. Every drop is a testament to the value of the lives that were lost. To weep in the dark is to gently, carefully tend to the garden of memory, watering the roots so that the names and the faces of the vanished will not wither away. If you were to float above the sleeping city, you would not hear this collective weeping. You would only see the peaceful, silver roofs bathed in the calm light of the moon. But beneath those roofs, a massive, silent healing is taking place. The human heart, bruised and battered beyond recognition, is slowly attempting to knit itself back together. It takes an unimaginable courage to carry this weight and still wake up the next morning to boil the water and sweep the floor. It is an everyday heroism to hold a heart full of ghosts and still manage to offer a soft smile to a neighbor on the street. As the night deepens, the tears slowly begin to dry. The exhaustion of grief acts as a heavy, narcotic blanket, pulling the weary souls down into the merciful oblivion of sleep. The empty chairs, the unmailed letters, and the locked doors blur into the soft edges of dreams. Let the quiet of the night be a comfort to them, and to you. Understand that the weight of memory, no matter how heavy, is made entirely of love. And love, even when it is sorrowful, is the very thing that keeps the human spirit tethered to the earth. Breathe in the cool, still air of the night. Release the burdens of the day, knowing that it is safe to rest. The ghosts of the past are gentle now. They do not wish to haunt, they only wish to be remembered. Close your eyes, let the heavy, peaceful dark hold you, and surrender to the deep, restorative quiet of sleep. Watch the way the morning light touches the edges of the shattered stones, turning the gray dust into a soft, glowing gold that promises a gentler day. There is a profound, almost sacred quiet that settles over a city when the long, terrifying nightmare has finally exhausted itself. The heavy, suffocating silence of the immediate aftermath, the year zero, has slowly begun to shift. It is no longer the silence of shock, nor the breathless waiting of people hiding in the dark. It is a new kind of quiet. It is the steady, rhythmic, breathing silence of a world that is slowly, painstakingly coming back to life. If you were to walk down these broken avenues now, your footsteps would no longer echo against empty ruins. You would hear the sounds of an ancient, deeply human resilience. You would hear the soft scrape of a trowel against mortar. You would hear the rhythmic, metallic clink of a small hammer chipping away the old, hardened cement from a salvaged brick. You would hear the low, comforting murmur of voices discussing not the grand, terrifying movements of armies, but the simple, vital geometry of a new doorframe. Imagine a woman named Lise. She stands in a long line of other women, their shoulders touching, their clothes dusted with a fine, pale powder that makes them look like living statues carved from the ruins themselves. The morning air is crisp, carrying the faint, metallic scent of rain from the night before, but the sun is warm on their faces. They are passing bricks. It is a hypnotic, mesmerizing dance. Lise turns to her left, receiving a heavy, rough red brick from the calloused hands of her neighbor. She feels the coarse texture of the baked clay against her palms, a solid, tangible piece of the earth. She turns to her right, passing the brick to the next woman down the line. Turn, receive, turn, pass. Hand to hand to hand. They do not speak much. The work is too heavy, and their breath is too precious. But in the silence of their labor, a profound and beautiful healing is taking place. For years, these women were taught to look at one another with suspicion, to guard their words, to close their doors against the world. Now, they are entirely dependent on the strength of the woman standing beside them. With every brick they pass, they are dismantling the invisible walls of fear that had been built around their hearts. They are clearing the rubble not just from the streets, but from their own souls. They are rebuilding the very foundation of community, one heavy, dusty stone at a time. As the sun climbs higher, illuminating the vast, jagged landscape of the city, the true scale of their quiet heroism becomes visible. They are sweeping away a dark century, making room for the light. Down a narrow, cleared pathway, an elderly man named Elias is slowly walking. He carries a small, woven basket over his arm. The heavy, oppressive coats of the winter have finally been shed, replaced by a lighter sweater, patched at the elbows but clean. He is walking toward the town square, a place that was once a terrifying stage for loud voices and marching boots. Today, the square is quiet. In the center, attached to the only remaining wall of the old municipal building, is a massive wooden board. It is completely covered in fluttering pieces of paper. Some are written on elegant stationery, some on the torn margins of old newspapers, some on the backs of ration cards. They are notes of seeking, messages cast out into the great, unknown sea of the aftermath. Elias approaches the board. His eyes, clouded with age and sorrow, scan the hundreds of names written in faded ink and charcoal. He is looking for a word, a sign, a whisper from his brother who lived in the East. He comes here every morning, a quiet pilgrimage of hope. Today, a young woman is standing beside him. She is holding a small pot of paste and a fresh slip of paper. She looks at Elias, noticing the slight tremble in his hands. She does not turn away. She offers him a soft, weary, but entirely genuine smile. "The light is better today," she whispers, her voice a gentle melody in the quiet air. It makes it easier to read the small letters. Elias nods, his heart warming at the simple, unforced kindness of her words. "It is," he agrees softly. The spring is finally coming. He does not find his brother's name today. But as he turns to walk home, he does not feel the crushing weight of despair that used to accompany him. He feels the warmth of the young woman's smile. He feels the sun on his shoulders. He realizes that while he is searching for his past, he is also surrounded by people who are gently, quietly inviting him into the future. The connections that were severed are being retied, not with grand declarations, but with shared glances, small kindnesses, and the mutual, quiet courage to simply keep looking. This courage weaves its way into the very fabric of the recovering world. It is present in the small, makeshift rooms that have been cleared in the cellars and the ground floors of the ruined buildings. Step into one of these rooms as the afternoon light slants through a window that has no glass, only a piece of translucent oiled paper stretched tight against the frame to keep out the wind. Inside, the walls are bare brick, but the floor has been swept immaculately clean. A young mother sits at a wooden table that was pieced together from salvaged crates. Before her lies a piece of fabric. It is the silk of a discarded parachute, washed in the river until it is a soft, gleaming white. With a pair of small, silver scissors, she is carefully cutting a pattern. She is making a dress for her daughter. For so long, the world dictated what they must wear, how they must think, and what colors were allowed in the grim tapestry of the war. To cut this beautiful, flowing fabric, to imagine her child running through the streets in something so bright and free, is an act of pure, quiet rebellion. It is a declaration of love. As her needle pulls the thread through the silk, she hums a lullaby, a soft, ascending tune that floats out the open window and mixes with the sound of the hammers down the street. It is the sound of a mother reclaiming the right to dream for her child. And slowly, miraculously, the earth itself begins to respond to this great, quiet exhaling of the human spirit. The winter had been impossibly long and bitter, locking the ruins in a suffocating grip of ice. But the calendar has finally turned. The frost has melted, washing the gray ash deeper into the soil, leaving behind a rich, damp scent of wet clay and dormant roots. In a small courtyard hidden behind a wall of stacked, salvaged bricks, a profound and ancient ritual is taking place. The heavy paving stones of the courtyard were shattered during the dark years, exposing a small, rectangular patch of dark brown earth. A father and his young son are kneeling in the dirt. The father uses a broken piece of iron pipe to gently loosen the soil, turning it over, breaking up the hard, compacted clods. His hands are dark with the earth, a stark contrast to the gray dust that covered them for so long. The little boy sits beside him, holding a small, folded piece of newspaper. Inside the paper are seeds. They are not exotic or rare. They are simple, sturdy things, radishes, climbing beans, perhaps a few saved sunflower seeds. Here, the father whispers, his voice thick with an emotion he cannot quite name. He presses his thumb into the soft soil, making a shallow indentation. Put it right here, in the dark. The little boy pinches a single, tiny seed between his fingers. He places it carefully into the small depression. The father gently sweeps a blanket of dark earth over it, patting it down with the flat of his palm. To plant a seed in a ruined city is a breathtaking act of faith. It is a quiet, radical trust in the future. The father knows that the seed will require water, which must be carried by hand from a distant pump. He knows it will require sunlight, and time, and protection. But as he looks at the dark patch of earth, he sees a miracle waiting to unfold. He sees the absolute certainty that the green shoot will push its way through the darkness, reaching for the light, entirely unbothered by the history of the ground it grows in. He puts his arm around his son, drawing the boy close to his chest. They sit in the quiet courtyard, breathing in the scent of the damp soil, feeling the warmth of the afternoon sun, waiting for the world to turn green once more. As the day begins its slow, graceful surrender to the evening, the rhythm of the city changes. The clinking of the hammers fades away. The long lines of women passing bricks disband, their muscles aching, but their spirits strangely lightened by the progress of the day. The sky deepens into a rich, velvety indigo. The stars begin to prick through the twilight, shining down on a landscape that is still broken, still scarred, but no longer silent, and no longer entirely dark. Small, warm squares of light begin to appear in the newly cleared windows. They are not the harsh, blinding lights of searchlights, nor the terrifying glow of fires. They are the soft, gentle lights of solitary candles, of small kerosene lamps resting on salvaged tables. Walk past these windows and you will see the quiet, beautiful tapestry of ordinary life resuming. You will see a family sharing a simple bowl of potato soup, their heads bowed in profound, wordless gratitude. You will see a man reading a borrowed book by the light of a single wick, allowing his mind to wander into stories that have nothing to do with sorrow. You will see an old woman sitting in a rocking chair, knitting a woolen blanket, her hands moving with the steady, comforting rhythm of an ocean wave. They are carrying the immense weight of their memories, yes. The empty chairs at the table still echo with the presence of those who did not return. The sorrow is a quiet guest in every room. But it is no longer the only guest. Beside the sorrow sits a gentle, melancholic hope. It is a hope that has been tested by the darkest fires of the human experience and has emerged forged into something unbreakable. It is the realization that they have walked through the absolute depths of the night, and they have survived. The wind picks up, a soft, fragrant spring breeze that carries the scent of the nearby forests, of blooming hawthorn and fresh rain. It blows through the open windows, stirring the candle flames, gently ruffling the curtains made from old flour sacks. It feels like a long, soothing sigh from the earth itself. Inside her small room, Lise, the woman who passed bricks all day, lies down on her narrow bed. She is exhausted, her bones heavy, her hands raw. But as she pulls the quilt up to her chin, she turns her head to look out the window. She can see the silhouette of the wall they built today. It is uneven, the mortar is thick and rough, and the bricks are a patchwork of different shades of red and brown. It is not perfect. But it stands. It holds back the dark. It is a monument to their survival. She closes her eyes, letting the quiet of the night wash over her. She listens to the gentle rustle of the wind. She does not think of the past, with all its terrors and its shadows. She does not worry for the future, with all its arduous work still waiting to be done. She simply rests in the beautiful, fragile sanctuary of the present moment. She sends a quiet, whispered wish out into the starry night. It is not a wish for wealth, or power, or grand triumphs. It is a simple, enduring wish for peace. A wish for quiet mornings, for bread on the table, for seeds growing in the dark earth, and for the gentle, unbroken rhythm of ordinary days. Let the peacefulness of that wish wrap around you now. Feel the heavy burdens of the day slipping away, replaced by the soft, steady warmth of a hopeful heart. The bricks have been laid. The seeds have been planted. The spring has returned to the broken earth, bringing with it the promise that all things, eventually, find a way to heal. Breathe deeply of the cool, still air. Let your mind drift on the quiet currents of the night. The world is resting, gathering its strength for a new dawn, and you are entirely safe to rest along with it. Surrender to the deep, restorative embrace of sleep, and let the first light of tomorrow find you in peace.